Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first workshop of 2024, March the 1st. Ms. Hilbrick.
She's over here.
There you are. Thank you. Will you please call the roll for us?
Yes, sir. Councilman De La Garza?
I am present.
Councilwoman Scott?
Scott?
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Young?
Here.
Councilman Loughran?
Present.
Mayor Crocker?
Here.
I do not see Miss Josie yet, so.
Okay. Thank you. If you would join me for the pledges and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. Mr. Garza, how are you doing this afternoon?
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members.
Yeah, I'm not used to that either, Jesus. Are there any announcements, reminders?
No, sir.
How about public and employee recognitions?
No, sir.
Okay, moving right along then. Items from council.
I have
Mr. Lofgren, yes.
We've always had a traffic safety problem at Victoria East, and the city has done what it can with signs and stuff. And I know that we could point at VISD and say they should do this, but it's also it's a city problem. And I would like us to spend some money, either the Sales Tax Corporation or the council, spend money for an engineering study to see how we could improve the traffic over at East. Maybe an outlet to the frontage road or whatever. But I would like council to consider us doing that because something needs to be done about the traffic over there. It's not.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing that up. I think we could probably have some discussions about that going forward. And Mr. Garza, if you could maybe help facilitate that.
Absolutely, and we can bring it up at the next VSTDC meeting as well.
Sounds good, all right. Thank you, Mr. Loughran. Any other items from council?
That's it.
Okay, moving on then, citizens communications. I don't have any green cards, so is there anyone present who wishes to make a presentation to the council? Seeing no one then, we will move along to item 3, which is city manager reports. I understand we may be taking these a little bit out of order than they are on the agenda, so Mr. Garza, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, absolutely. So we figured we would just mess with everybody involved and just mix it all up. And so we're going to go ahead and actually take up the conversation on the action agenda, the comprehensive plan action agenda first. And then we will take up an update on the Inflow and Infiltration reduction study. And then we will transition to the CIP conversation. And then lastly, we will get to the Eminent Domain overview by Allison. So we will stay here late if we have to, Allison.
That's not my decision, that's it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. In any case, I'll turn it over to Julie so she can kick it off on the comprehensive plan action agenda.
So, good afternoon. I'm going to sort of reiterate some of the things that I gave in my last presentation. Is this close enough? Can y'all hear?
I don't know. Is it on?
Okay, is that better? Can you hear? Okay. And kind of just go some overview of really what the action agenda is. I know I just reviewed this when we reviewed our last action agenda. This is not clicking. Oh, have to point it somewhere else, I guess. So, as you know, the action agenda is a companion document to our comprehensive plan that we adopted in 2016. So if you remember, the comprehensive plan is broken up into two sections: the existing city, which really was an overview of where we've been, what our city looked like at that time in 2016, and then the future city section, which was an overview of all the things that we want to achieve going forward and was the vision for the city of Victoria as we move forward. So a big component of that was actually just the last chapter, which was a one-page fold-out, which is the community action agenda, which is the implementation plan. So that's what these action agendas are. They're the implementation component of our comprehensive plan. So what you're seeing today is the 2024 to 2026 action agenda will be our third action agenda, and will replace the one that we just completed, the 2021 to 2023 action agenda, which was approved in February of 2021. So this is the original action agenda, as you can see, community action agenda. And we've actually made a lot of progress on this, so that's the need to kind of continue to refine and continue to have that list of items that staff should be working on to implement our comprehensive plan. So that's a really tiny document, but it's can be compressed into this. So the comprehensive plan is broken into 5 chapters or 5 sections: land use and development, mobility, growth capacity and infrastructure, economic opportunity, and recreation and amenities. And then within those, if this is actually copied directly from that previous graph, it's just, I think, a little easier to see. In land use and development, we had some recommendations for special area plans, so things like our special area plans are like our parks and recreation plans, the I&I studies, the transportation or thoroughfare master plan, greater or plans that take a little bit more specific approach to one aspect of our community. Then we have special districts, which are things like tax increment reinvestment zones. We had the UDO, so we can do a nice big check on that. And then beautification efforts. So you see the neighborhood cleanups would fall under that beautification efforts. And so that we have these sections in each. Mobility is, the TSM is transportation systems, so, and that's to really increase capacity or look at our existing roadways. So medians would be an example of TSM. Street rehabilitation and maintenance, that's pretty self-explanatory. Our entire street program would fall into that category. The hike and bike master plan was a to-do, and we can put a nice big check under that, but of course now we have to implement that hike and bike master plan. And that would be our active transportation master plan, which encompasses, hiking and biking trails, as well as sidewalks. The growth capacity and infrastructure, we wanted to enhance the CIP process, so you'll see another CIP presentation today, which I think is much better than how we used to approach CIP. Water supply and storage was a big item. Drainage solutions, under economic opportunity, next-gen industrial park, support for regional trades center role, and then tourism for sports tournaments and special events. So some of these you can see we've completely checked off, and others we're just now getting started with. Recreation amenities, parkland dedication, and then Lone Tree Creek Trail expansion were 2 items that have made it on that original community action agenda. So as I mentioned, we've also, this action agenda for the very first time, which is different than the previous action agendas, will have specific items from these different completed master plans. They're not really highlighted on the sheet that y'all have in front of you as the proposed action agenda, but our internal documents list exactly the page and number of where all of these items come from. And so there are some things on there that have come from these completed master plans as they've taken a deeper look into specific issues or aspects of our community. So with that, I'd like to go through what we are proposing to be in this next action agenda. These are not weighted as any one priority over another. They're all equally important, and they're all items that different departments, our stakeholders in our community be working on, primarily city staff. But and they're broken up into those focus areas of the comp plan. So the first out of land use and development would be to adopt our new and updated floodplain maps. The I&I drainage study implementation and drainage fee, And then infill and redevelopment analysis, really related to infrastructure projects and what infrastructure is needed to facilitate infill in certain areas of our town. Under the mobility section, we have transit route study, increased downtown parking access and improvements, and it's specifically being minded to ADA accessibility, pedestrian and motorist safety, more of a public information campaign with our police department and public information departments. Then Guy Grant reconstruction, North Street reconstruction, and how do you phase those out, and the projects in their totality, because of course they're many years long type projects. And then complete streetscape package and mobility package, and these are this is a specific action item out of the downtown master plan. And so I can get you if you want more information on what those are in that plan, but it's related to that master plan.
Julie, before we proceed, I just want to pause that for a second, see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns with the first two categories, land use and development and mobility, and those items that we're including in those.
Could you just go back one slide?
Sure.
Okay.
And in case you're wondering, in some of these are things that we're already actively, working on, right? And one of the ones that's on this specific list that probably doesn't get talked about a lot in front of all of you is related to the transit route study, because that is one item that was put into the VSTDC budget for this year. However, it seems like the Regional Planning Commission will be able to receive a grant from TxDOT in order to conduct that route study. And so we do anticipate that route study taking place hopefully by the summertime or over the summertime, because we do know that there's a lot of things that are depending on that route study. Conversations around funding, conversations around routes. We, for example, want to have a bus stop in front of our new public safety headquarters building. Currently, there is not a stop, in that area. And so incorporating things like that, incorporating some of our major employment hubs a little better, incorporating some amenities like Riverside Park. There isn't a bus stop inside of Riverside Park, for example. So we do anticipate that there will be some really good recommendations stemming from that route study that might inform some of our own investments within our own, parks and other facilities. So I figured for the council members that aren't part of VSTDC, figured you may want to update on that item just briefly, and I'll continue to keep you updated on some of these during our one-on-ones as well.
And Mr. Gordon, one question on that. Remind me, and you may not have said, but the potential timing on that grant, do we know what that looks like?
We haven't received confirmation. I just talked to Mike Oeda about this last week, and they've had already a preliminary meeting. I forget the name of the engineering firm that it looks like TxDOT is hiring to conduct the study, but they've already had an initial scoping meeting to try and at least fine-tune the scope of the study. From the Regional Planning Commission's perspective, it's a little bit much broader than just us, because as you know, they manage not only the urban transportation program, but they're getting, mass transportation, out to Bloomington into town, for example, or how do we get from certain areas out in the county, or maybe it's park and rides, that are developed somewhere in the outskirts of the county to facilitate, people that might be coming in from surrounding counties. And so I think they're taking the right approach to taking a regional approach to it, even though, of course, our primary interest is the urban system. I think they're anticipating getting confirmation hopefully this month, March.
Okay.
But there's really no way to guarantee that.
Okay. Good. Thanks.
And just to remind everyone, the handout that you were given completely corresponds with the different slides that I have up there. So the mobility is in red and on the chart, and it expands on to, you also have the action leaders, which highlights the different entities or departments that would be involved and primarily involved. If during a project other stakeholders are identified, they of course would be brought in, but the primary action leaders for the different activities.
And out of those two first categories, even just today on the agenda, of course, you're going to get an update on the I&I And as part of the CIP update, we are including updates on the conversation of phasing for Guy Grant and North Street. So.
Good.
So the next category is the growth capacity and management. It's the largest category of items, although some could fit in others, but ultimately they really are related to our growth capacity and then management of our growth. And that would be update existing water, storm, and sewer and storm sewer infrastructure to be able to handle and manage the growth. Develop a water supply strategy. Maintain and improve a level of service with population growth, and this is really related to our emergency services personnel. Water conservation public information campaign, which also goes hand in hand to developing that water supply strategy. We want to have water and then conserve the water that we have. Enhance emergency preparedness and response capabilities. Strengthen community partnerships and public outreach or engagement. And that was something that was first submitted by our public safety departments, but really in talking to the different departments, it's something that we all need to work on. In fact, during the MTP kickoff, our MPO administrator, Maggie Bergeron, had the great idea of let's develop a community or a citywide stakeholder list as we go through all of our planning efforts all the time and have all the different departments contribute to what those stakeholder categories are. And so that would, perfect example of work we do to implement the comprehensive plan. Increase the fire department and police department efficiencies through technology and staff development or retention. Complete the landfill expansion project. As you know, we've received the permit to expand it. Building the cells is an actual nitty-gritty other type of project related to that. Waste diversion campaign. Amend the landfill contract to include Class 1 non-hazardous waste. So, of course, the landfill contract comes up every so many years and has to be done, but specifically a project would be to work on that Class 1 non-hazardous waste, our ability to collect that. Continue the beautification and maintenance projects, which includes neighborhood cleanups. Continue to maintain and improve our ISO rating, which could include the relocation of Fire Station 5 if necessary. It really kind of depends on what those ISO studies kind of relate to continue to maintain what we have. Workforce support, which can include initiatives for housing, childcare, and transportation. So transit study would be related to workforce support. So some of these are definitely interrelated. I'm sorry, I'm just moving on. I just keep reading. So that's growth and capacity. Then economic opportunity is the workforce support and workforce development. Then supporting local businesses in the Main Street and downtown avenue, and developing Main Street subcommittee structure and volunteer networks with the public, which again, that citywide stakeholder list could potentially benefit them. Development of infrastructure for economic development for new industrial park, airport, port, and I-69 development opportunities. So basically primary jobs and what can we do to encourage that and economic development. And then create and implement a downtown activation guidebook, develop a downtown maintenance program, and strengthen outreach, communication outreach of downtown offerings to our community partners, specifically the college and university. So do you want to pause on these two to have any additional discussions before we get to the last one? Yes.
Question. What exactly would the downtown activation guidebook be all about? Would it be about developing downtown, or would it be about if you want to develop in downtown, this is what you need to do?
It's if you want to come to downtown, here are the different avenues that, the different folks that you reach out to development services, or here's, this University Small Business Development Center, and basically kind of providing all the resources. So it's almost more of a resource book on how to relocate downtown to activate.
Right, so it might include, a predetermined list of, possible incentives, for example, information on the facade grant, the big grant, just something that it's like a one package deal for downtown folks. It's very common in communities to have these types of things. In Kingsville, for example, if somebody was looking to move downtown, there was a binder that our Main Street manager would provide them with all the details. A big reason why, cities cities want to facilitate development downtown, right? And so one of the ways to do that is through something like this. Now, obviously, we want to make sure that we also have information available for those that are wanting to develop anywhere, right? But there's definitely some unique things just for downtown that don't apply elsewhere, right? Whether that be the entertainment district and what that comes with, right? Whether it's the cultural district or these grant programs that we only offer downtown, right? So there are extra things that are in place, right? Certain parts of the code might be different, just for the downtown area. And so we want to make sure that because there are so many elements of our codes and practices and others that treat downtown different, that we have something that is tangible to be able to assist somebody in educating them on what all that is.
Thank you.
Any other questions for growth, capacity management, and economic opportunity? Okay, so our last focus area is our parks to standard investments in existing parks. So we are always investing in upgrading parks, but taking a little holistic approach to whenever a park is getting a new playground, and kind of looking at what other, are there any existing substandard conditions in that park at that time that you're, budgeting a playground replacement? And do we need to go ahead and look at that park more holistically is really what the Parks to Standard investment is speaking to. Community center restoration, expansion, and renovation, which, is a study is currently underway, involving the community center. Riverside Park rejuvenation, and that's adding amenities to Riverside Park, specifically looking at the splash pad, trail, upgrades to the children's park, or rebuilding the children's park and other things such as that. Ethel Lee Tracy Park renovations and expansion, the MLK Park reconstruction, marketing plan for recreational programs to City of Victoria residents, updating the community and regional park athletic fields, the Lone Tree Trail Phase Network expansion, and then Riverside Golf Course and Clubhouse maintenance. So with that is our proposed 2024 to 2026 action agenda. I will say this may be our last action agenda.
You have 3 minutes.
I didn't touch anything, I promise. This may be our last action agenda. As we, depending on in 2 years, if we need to extend this or potentially have a 27 to 29 action agenda, or will we be at the point where we need to talk about an update to our comprehensive plan? Have we done so much work out of this comprehensive plan, and has our visions and goals changed for the city that we need to start looking at a completely new comprehensive plan or an update to this one that we have? Or do we continue with our action agendas? Our current plan was looking at a 2035 planning horizon to 2035, and so I would not recommend going past 2030 without really looking at a comprehensive update of our plans, so that we make sure that we have enough direction from our community to know what we should be working on. So with that, what we're proposing next is, of course, today is the presentation of this proposed new action agenda, and then at the March 19th council meeting, we will be asking you to adopt it by resolution.
And I'll just briefly add that, many of the things that are listed on this document, of course, are things that necessitate funding, right? And so realistically, in order to achieve some of these, we're going to need to get past, the 2026 time frame, right? And so there probably will still be plenty of things to do, once we get to 2026. But I also think it's a good time to have that conversation, simply because, we recognize that the council makeup will be different, right? I mean, we have 2 new council members coming on board this May. Who knows who might be coming on the following May. And so at that time frame would be a good conversation to have with the new council to confirm if, the path that we've been heading on, that's consistent with these priorities and consistent with what we've been doing over the last, decade or so, if that's the path to go, right? And if the answer is yes, more than likely, we might recommend continuing implementation of the foundation of this plan. But to Julie's point, you can only do it so much, so far along before it's probably just best practice to go through another comprehensive plan. If nothing else, to simply emphasize that we're in a much different place than where we were in 2016, because keep in mind that the plan does take into account an existing city kind of snapshot of where you are on top of the recommendations. And so in some respects, it might be nice, to have an updated formal comp plan that recognizes that our existing snapshot is simply just a much better snapshot than the last time we formalized the snapshot, in 2016. So just things to think about.
And I'll add, obviously this is a culmination of the various priorities from individual members of council. Thanks to all of y'all for taking time and to staff also for taking time to meet to go through this. There is some long-term projects on here that obviously will go past that. There's some low-hanging fruit that I think we can meet. But I think it's worthwhile to identify those priorities from council and help focus staff and our thoughts going forward. So thanks for everyone for your time on that. Anything else? Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fogel.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. Okay. Well, even though it's not formally adopted, we're already rocking and rolling with some of these items. And so to that end, I'm going to ask Ken Gill to come up and sprint and introduce the next topic, which is related to our I&I study.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce our consultant that has been working on this I&I study, and they've done really great. I'm going to not take their thunder, but Jose Maldonado and Daniela Lopez, both of them have done great. One of them's, they'll go into the good part that they've done.
And also, we have plenty of time today to ask questions, have conversation. These topics can be complex and convoluted, and so it's important for staff that council really gain a good understanding of the issues and the proposed solutions. And so please feel free to ask as many questions as you want, because we do have time today to ensure that you walk out of here an expert. Not with a PE, but close enough.
Maybe you will. Well, thank you, everyone. We're happy to be back. It's crazy. It's been almost a year since we were last back. So again, I'm Jose Maldonado, the project manager for this program. And again, I got Daniela Lopez here, who is our modeling lead. She's going to go into the fun stuff that Ken likes to go over that and provide some more detail. So here we go. Just this, right? Oh, there we go. Awesome. Thank you. So just a quick overview again. So this was a kind of a three-step process that we had. Last time I came, we spoke about the flow monitoring analysis, which is the very first step that kind of got us to the next step, which is, modeling was also going on at the same time. But at that point, we were just getting started because we needed a lot of information in order to feed the model to get to the results. And then the phased SSES, which is the big part that we've been working on over the past year, is really getting boots on the ground. SSES meaning Sanitary Sewer Evaluation Survey or Study. And that means actually going out and doing inspections, looking at the pipes, looking at the manholes, and determining what needs to be done first. So I'm going to turn it over to Daniela to discuss the modeling aspect of it. Again, feel free to ask questions as we're going through this presentation, and I can jump up here. Later on, I'll jump onto the SSES and give you our recommendations as far as 5-year CIP. But Daniela, there you go.
All right. Hey, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So, quick model. So I'm going to keep things pretty high level, but feel free. I've heard that you guys essentially saw this presentation in a lot more detail a year and a half ago, so if you don't remember stuff, feel free to interrupt me. But I'm going to keep it fairly high level on what we did. So the first step of this was doing flow monitoring. So flow monitoring feeds into most of the studies that moved on. So both the modeling and the SSES. Flow monitoring involves on putting like literal flow meters in the sewer systems to measure area velocity, which with that you calculate flow rate. We installed 31 flow meters across the sanitary sewer system, so we broke the city essentially into 31 basins. And we had an average basin size of about 60,000 linear feet per sewer shed. That's a really good number. That's really where you want it to be. Anything larger than that doesn't give you a lot of information on the sewer shed, but anything smaller, it can just get really expensive. So this is like a really good spot to be. The first step to doing the hydraulic modeling is building that model. And so this is a very time-intensive process. We had the city provide us a lot of GIS, as-built records. We went out and did about 500 manhole surveys so that we could get elevational data, and we feed that all into the model. So we build a full system model, which means that every manhole, pipe, and lift station and force main is represented in the system. So it's a lot of data to feed into one digital network. And that picture that you see is essentially like a profile. So if you were able to look under the ground, that's how that pipe network would look under the surface. And so what we want to make sure is that everything is flowing downstream towards the wastewater treatment plants, and that the lift stations are represented accurately with pump curves and with the correct wet well diameters and the correct force main diameters. So once a network is actually built, the way we load flows into it is by loading subcatchments into the network. So subcatchments are essentially what feeds those flows into the hydraulic model. The way that we do this is that we grab your city parcels and we load those into the model as subcatchments, and those, if they're residential, they're loaded with a population, and that population is then multiplied by a per capita flow rate, and that's how you get some dry weather flow in there. And for the non-residential ones, we use your water billing data, about 90% of your water billing data, and we put that as a static number on the model to represent non-residential flows. So anything commercial, industrial, restaurants, stuff like that. And we do that to start the calibration process. So calibrating the model involves using that flow monitoring data from those 31 flow meters. And we use it as a way to have the model predict what is being observed out there. So for each one of those flow meters, the blue in these graphs is the observed flow meter, and then the green is the model represented flow. And when we're doing the calibration, we move from the upstream meters all the way to the downstream meters, one by one, making sure that that green aligns with the blue. We start with the dry weather flow, and then we use a Wallingford hydrology method along with the groundwater infiltration module to represent the wet weather flows. So that each time on, does this have a pointer? Ooh, kind of. So these blue lines up here represent rainfall, and every time that it rains, your sewer system and every sewer system across the world, since they're not sealed tight, they experience some inflow from that rainfall. And so you can see the flow spike every time it rains. So we're trying to simulate that with the Wallingford hydrology method. So we finish a calibration for dry and wet weather flow, and then we want to stress your system to figure out where your bottlenecks are. So in the region, we normally use a 5-year, 6-hour design storm, which is what we have applied to the hydraulic model, to then stress the system and then see where the bottlenecks are. So this is a level of service within that we're trying to meet. We kind of prioritize by low to high importance. So low importance, or a non-issue, is the top left graph. That's, you can see the water level is contained within the pipe of the crown pipe. So that's a non-issue. Those pipes in the next graph will be labeled in green. Those are not a bottleneck, those are not a problem. Of medium importance is something that starts a surcharge. So surcharging is when the water level surpasses the crown of the pipe. So on medium importance is something that's surcharging, so it's being somewhat restricted, but it's not reaching close to the surface of the ground, meaning that it's not close to being an overflow. Then some high importance is somewhere where it's surcharging and it's within 4 feet of the ground. So it's really close to overflowing and through some manhole or to someone's house, stuff like that. And obviously the ones that we tackle first are any predicted overflows that the model gives us. So when that water surface reaches the top, that would be a sanitary sewer overflow. So these are the results from the 5-year, 6-hour design storm on the hydraulic model. So all the red spots are model predicted overflows. These were cross-verified with the city to kind of validate the model. If you can see, a lot of your the SSOs are contained within the very center of town. So this is the oldest part of the city. This is kind of where we're expecting to have a lot of issues because the pipes are older. The manholes are older, and so the older the assets are, the more defects they're going to have, and then the more water that can be let in. So on the right picture, it's a zoom in into that area, and you can see that there's a lot of SSOs, but overall, I know the picture looks like overwhelming with how many red dots you see, but in total, it's 2.8 million gallons of overflow during this very intense design storm. I've worked all across the state. That's for a city your size, you're doing pretty well. And so from this, we find out the bottlenecks and we start developing the capital improvement plans that we need to tackle. So we applied a standard. The city's priority is to renew your existing assets to be able to fix the existing defects and then therefore reduce the amount of I&I that's coming into the system. Based on the flow monitoring data and the model, we figured out the 6 basins that were kind of the leakiest, so where water is coming in the most, and we assumed that we're going to be able to achieve a 25% I&I reduction rate. So we're automatically reducing the flows from the model. So we identified the 6 basins to target a 25 I&I reduction percentage, and then those are priority number 1. And then priority number 2, 3, and 4, which Jose is going to go through, are identified as a 20% I&I reduction. So that's applied to the model. And then based on the final results from that, we developed capital improvement projects for any SSOs that weren't fixed just with this I&I removal.
Can you speak into the mic?
Sorry to jump in there. Just if you go back a slide, one key thing we wanted to point out, actually mentioned the system's doing really well. And when she mentions the 2 million gallons of overflows that we're experiencing, that's with the assumption that we do this I&I reduction. So just want to hit that hard that it assumes that that needs to be done. If you ran it without those projects happening, that number will be considerably higher. So just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, Jose, for clarifying. So this is a list of projects, of capital improvement projects within the wastewater collection system that we've identified. And we'll jump through these. If this is essentially the location, if we have to come back to kind of see where they are, we can come back to the slide. So project A is at the very downstream. It's at the wastewater treatment plant right now. There is a holding basin that's 11.3 million gallons of storage. So on the top two pictures, one is the as-built record, and the other one is how we applied that into the model. And then on the bottom pictures is a simulation. So the left one is with the holding basin being used, and the right one is without the holding basin being used. So if that holding basin isn't used, a lot of other overflows are predicted just upstream of the plant, because the plant doesn't have enough capacity to treat all of the peak wet weather flows. So it backs up into the collection system, and then it comes out of manholes immediately upstream of the plant. And so the first project is to do additional studies at the EQ basin, because right now it's not permitted. But the idea is to do some additional testing in the EQ basin and figure out if there's an impervious surface still in there. So worst case scenario is that if that impervious surface doesn't exist, we'd have to put some concrete layering so that then we can use it and get the EQ basin permitted. But the good news is that the basin is the right size. When it was built back in the 80s, it was very well thought out, so that basin fills in and fills out by gravity, meaning it doesn't have to be pumped in or out. So it's just a matter of doing some further studies and then just getting it permitted, hopefully. But the 11.3 million gallon, it's certainly big enough to contain the flows from the 5-year, 6-hour storm. Project B, the next set of projects are all kind of upsizing pipes, so I'll fly through them, but if you want to stop me, feel free to stop me. So Project B is on Lilac Lane. It's just upsizing a 10-inch to a 12-inch sewer, and since that upsizing isn't that great, we're going to also evaluate if we could just do pipe bursting. That way we don't have to renew the assets completely. Project C is on Buena Vista Avenue. It's about 850 feet of upsizing sewer from an 8-inch to a 12-inch pipe. On East North Street, there is an existing 12-inch that's pretty restricted, and it's a matter of upsizing this from a 12 to an 18. There is currently another project going on there, Phase 3B of North Street reconstruction. So the plan is to integrate the sewer upsizing as part of that existing project. Project E is along South Main Street. This is it's a pretty large bottleneck, so it backs up from, this is in the very center of the city, one of the older parts of town. And there's a lot of flow coming through this 12-inch, so it's pretty restricted. So the idea is to just upsize the 12 to an 18-inch and reduce a lot of the surcharging that's occurring upstream. This one would target a lot of those SSOs that you saw on the very center of town. Project F is on Pleasant Green Drive, and that's about 2,900 feet of upsizing an existing 8 and 10-inch sewer to a 12-inch sewer. So I think most of it is an 8, so it's mostly upsizing that to a 12. Again, pipe bursting will be evaluated here, so if we can do pipe bursting, we will. That'll save some money. That way the assets don't have to be completely renewed. Project N, this one requires a little bit of verification. We did some manhole surveys in this area, and the manhole surveys said that this pipe was a 15-inch, which causes a big bottleneck in that area because the rest of the sewers are 21. But we think that we just need to do additional verification to see if it's actually 15. If it is, it has to be upsized to a 21, but if we go out there and find out that it's actually a 21, it was just recorded incorrectly on the survey, then this project would then go away. Project H.
So can you go back to that one?
Yeah.
So assuming that it shows that that's actually a 21, like the rest of it, then is there another issue?
No.
Or is this being recommended solely based off of the flow monitor or not the model?
The model. So the model right now has...
The model counts it for being 15?
Yeah, the model has it as being 15 because the survey data that we did in the field said that it was a 15.
Got it.
But the GIS says that it's a 21. So right now, there's two differing sources of information. So it's just, and we found that out a couple days ago. So
Got it.
it's just a matter of going out there probably next week and seeing if it's actually a 15 or a 21. If it is a 15, it has to be upsized to a 21. But if it's a 21, then this project would be scratched from the list
Got it.
completely. Did that?
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Project H on Lawndale Avenue. This is actually extending a sewer pipe, so we don't normally like to do this, but sometimes it's very efficient to try to divert the flows to an existing pipe that has capacity. So right now, the Lawndale Avenue pipe flows to the right, and the one on North Navarro Street goes south. The one on Lawndale Avenue surcharges, and then there's a predicted overflow right there on, let's see, right there, there's a predicted overflow because the sewer downstream of that is backing up. But if you just add a little 8-inch connection between the Lawndale Avenue and Navarro Street, you alleviate that surcharging, get the flows to another place, and then eliminate that SSO. So our recommendation is to essentially create an overflow pipe.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are these listed in order of importance?
Where's the question?
Are they listed in order of importance?
Yeah.
So not necessarily, we were just laying out an order. That's what we have, A, B, and C. Just engineers, we like to either number or call it letters, and then we can work it out. We have a ranking that you see later on, so some of this have some play on what can be done. One doesn't affect the other in a way.
And can I ask a question too? And I'm going all the way back to Project A here, sorry, on the EQ basin. So I understood what the presentation was, but I guess my question is that currently being used as part of the system? So it is in use now?
Only under emergency situations. Go ahead.
Yeah, when the plant was originally built, they actually designed that into the system of how it works, and it works efficiently. I mean, when the rains come up and we get a lot of inflow, sewer naturally just, it doesn't have to be pumped into that basin, it flows into that basin, and then as the rain subsides, we treat that sewer and it's right back out. So it's a very efficiently done system.
Great.
It's just what she said, it's got a clay liner on it according to the plans. We just need to absolutely 100% verify with TCQ that, hey, we're good with that liner.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification.
Do we know, on the same topic of the basin, I know you mentioned it's 11.3
million gallons.
That's what it was designed to hold.
Yeah.
Do we know if it actually is holding 11.3, or if over the years, there's been buildup that maybe now it's not 11.3, and would that be a project that we would have to undertake to, I don't know, make it deeper or whatever to actually get it back up to being 11.3?
It should
How
still,
can we confirm that it's actually 11.3 still, I guess, is the question.
it should still be about 11.3. So we use both the as-built records, which estimates closer to 10, but we ended up using elevational data, so LiDAR data, which is very accurate, 1 meter measurements of the ground, to then size that final basin. So on that picture, when we included it in the model, we actually ended up using the LiDAR data and compared the as-builts with the LiDAR to kind of size that entire basin, if that makes sense.
But that's a great point, though. That's what we're mentioning. This really needs to be evaluated further, not just the liner, how it is, but it should be confirmed that via survey, because LiDAR does have a certain degree of accuracy. So making sure that is accurate. But based on everything that we've seen, I believe we were requiring 10.5 is what we need about.
I think the model, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the model only requires about 8 billion gallons, so there's still some room for error.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Really good questions. So those are most of the larger capital improvement projects. Other recommendations that we provided is a couple of manholes that could be sealed or raised to prevent sanitary sewer overflow from occurring. And then the final kind of project that we included within our CIP package was the abandonment of an existing 18 and 36-inch pipe that are paralleling a newer 42 and 54-inch pipe that lead directly to the plant. So these parallel large diameter sewers, when they put in the 54, they left the old one in. And if you look at pictures of that older 18 and 36-inch pipe, they're in really, really bad shape. They're clay pipes, they're broken like in a few places along the pipes, and the manholes are also in bad shape. So really what that means is that those acids are letting in a lot of I&I. So our plan, we ran the model without those pipes to see if there was sufficient capacity to convey the peak flows to the plant, and the 36-inch and 54-inch are appropriately sized. So the plan moving forward is to abandon those older acids to be able to remove I&R from the system, simplify the system for the city to have less assets to maintain while still providing the service that they need to convey the flows to the plant. And that's, go ahead.
A few comments to expound on what Daniela did. She did great. One thing, she mentioned the overflows. Remember, that's putting a 5-year storm on the city, the whole city, right? Yes. That doesn't mean these are overflowing now. We have a current situation. That's an extreme event. If you take 5 years and throw it all over the city, that's a lot of water. So I just want to kind of settle that down. We're not seeing these every time. The other thing that the model does is part of when we look at economic growth, we have to look, does our sewer system handle a potential subdivision or a potential industry? This is something that, as she said, you can go in there and put a load on our sewer system at Ball Airport, for instance, and see, does that downstream sewer start surcharging? Do we start having issues? So this model not only does, what we see now, it can see what happens in the future as we, add economic development, add buildings. The last point I want to make, she mentioned Pleasant Green. We're going to be talking about that in our CIP. It is not on Pleasant Green, it's behind it. So it's the Pleasant Green area, because I know that was one of the projects that she mentioned, but it's behind Pleasant Green. It's not actually on Pleasant Green.
Can remind me on, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot with this, but so our average daily rate of that gets treated at the regional wastewater treatment plant is what?
About 4.4.
And when we experience heavy rainfall, that peaks to what?
It can peak up to 20 is what we see.
Okay. And so we're seeing, an increase of 12 to 15, MGDs per day when we have heavy rainfall, right?
And we can treat about 9.8 to 10 running through the plant.
Sure. And I guess what's confusing for me is that I think you said that the model shows only 3 MGD in overflow?
No.
Not MGD, so MGD is million gallon per day, so million gallons, period. The total volume of 2.83, I think, million gallons. Not, because that's a flow rate.
Right.
The MGD is a flow rate, and then the 2.8 is a volume. So you could have a peak flow rate of 20 MGD for a period of an hour, but that doesn't equate to 20 million gallons total.
Got it.
Yeah.
How does the smoke testing play into the recommendations, right? Because that was, okay. Because I know that was one thing that garnered a lot of attention, when we announced the study, and people were wondering, what's with all the smoke, No new pope, no nothing.
So my part of the modeling is complete, and I'll pass it on to the more interesting boots on the ground
Okay,
survey.
so you're gonna hit on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
I've got a question first, because you said we're all gonna be experts, and I've been lost since about the third slide. I thought that the I&I study was a study of stormwater infiltrating our sewer system. But what I'm seeing is recommendations to beef up our sewer system. I thought the study was going to give us ways to stop the stormwater from going into the sewer system instead of beefing up the sewer system. So I'm trying to figure out, what are we trying to do here?
So it was always intended to address the sewer system, because the sewer system is the one that goes to the regional treatment facility, right? Your storm sewer doesn't go to the regional treatment facility. Storm sewer might lead to a creek or to somewhere else, right? And so the issue here is infiltration to the sewer system, because that's what flows to the plant. And it's a combination of having inadequately sized pipes to carry the waste. But when you have an infiltration of rainwater into the sewer pipe that goes into the regional treatment facility, that's when it becomes an issue. So this was always going to be looking at sewer system and the impact that rainfall and the infiltration of rainfall into the sewer system has. The drainage study that we did a couple years ago, that's the one that had to do with just straight up storm drains, storm water, that type of thing.
So when Mr. Gill talks about a new development and us having the capacity, he's anticipating that there would be an infiltration of stormwater.
Well, whenever we have a new development, all those people got to flush the toilet, all those people got to take baths,
Right.
All those people got to do all that. And so there's also a capacity conversation to be had when we're adding assets, which is probably why a lot of these pipes are undersized, right? Because when these pipes were first built, decades and decades ago, they didn't have to account for as much flow that goes through them now. And the way that our community has grown, which is to the north with our regional wastewater treatment plant on the south side, I was going to use a bad term, but all the stuff has to flow through the middle of town. And if your middle of town infrastructure was built based off capacity from 50, 60, 70 years ago, it's not going to have the pipes big enough to sustain the waste that they themselves are producing on top of the waste that's flowing down from Terra Vista and from Woodway and from all these areas that developed after that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and you're definitely right in the part, and y'all stole a lot of my thunder on my presentation. No, but in general, really, the section I'm discussing right now about the SSCS is really where we're seeing storm sewer or groundwater that's coming into our system. So you're right, that is what we're going to be looking at, and that is the large portion of the improvements that we're looking to do. But we want to have a wholesale look at your system, and that's why we're running the model, because the systems are two different things. There's capacity, which is how big the pipes are, what is the condition of the pipes. In SSCS, when we do I&I reduction, you can only remove so much. In some cases, the pipes are just going to be too small. And that's what we're doing, two different tracks on how much can we remove and figure out if these pipes are big enough. That's why when Daniela mentioned that these are the improvements we have, it assumes we're going to do these improvements where we're going to make sure we tighten up our system so stormwater doesn't come in through the manholes or through the pipes or through the clean outs. That is the number one goal. And when you see the ranking that we have, that's where we want to start.
So is it safe to assume that, I know you're about to tell us about the smoke testing and that, these improvements that you guys have recommended are tied to this test we're about to hear about? There's a correlation there?
Yes, there's correlation. And the one thing that we can never know is when she mentioned 25% reduction, 20% reduction, it can vary. We've seen as high as 30-35% reduction in some systems. It can be higher, but really we got to use our best judgment based on one of the average where it kind of runs. And because of the I&I study that we did where the metering, where we saw it was the worst, the leakiest areas, that's why in that one we went more like a 25, a little more aggressive. The 20 is kind of more down the middle that we think we can get. Typically, the way these studies go, we do this work and we come back in 10 years, once we've done a lot of improvements, run the meters again and see where we ended up, how much reduction did we actually have. And granted, we may get more, but we may get less in certain areas.
Yeah, I had a question, kind of going back, and there's been a couple of things talking about stuff flowing downhill, and some of the projects in there, not understanding certainly the mechanics, well, I understand the mechanics of it, but going from an 8-inch to a 10-inch size doesn't seem like a huge, amount from that standpoint. And then I don't know what the cost is, and then are we thinking about future growth on the north side? We haven't had a lot of growth, but what are we thinking in terms of potential growth from there? And then is in 20 years our pipes undersized from that standpoint? So these are just, I'm throwing these things out there, and I'm sure you've thought about that, but.
Yeah, and the study that we did do, that is one limitation we didn't have. We did not look into the future. This is really starting to get your system up to make sure that we're handling the existing flows in the design event that we talked about. This is where a master plan grows out of. This is the beginning of a master plan where you start loading the developments that come in later, load it on, and this gives you the base model of where to start. And yes, at those points, you can look at, okay, well, this development's going to require, 2 MGD to carry through. That means all these pipes need to be upsized. So that definitely does need to be looked at when that happens. The one thing in a lot of these areas that you saw these developments, it's mostly inside the city. It's not on the edges of town where a huge development could come through. But those type of things could definitely change what happens. At that point, that is where you see a lift station may get put in and it gets to get pumped to where we have capacity. It becomes more complex, but yes, this is the first step to getting to a master plan to give you that 15, 20-year outlook. This is really more like a near-term outlook into our system.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but the existing water sewer master plan that we have that was adopted in 2018, didn't it have some recommendations on how to address, I guess, when we do experience some of that major growth?
It did. It had some of it. This is what, and that's what Urban did. They did a wastewater master plan, but they looked at capacity of the plants, capacity of the lines, and they really focused on the larger lines where they're at. And that's what Jose was saying, is we have a lot of the larger lines in outlying areas, on the west of Main Street. We got a large interceptor. We've got one going down Stockbauer. So we've got the outside covered. And what the study did on this one, the model, was look at the existing system where it's already developed. You've got the majority of the inner part of the city, it's already developed. It's not going to really change that flow rate.
Okay.
But this does both. It leads us towards, inputting some more data into it. But you're right.
We got to figure out how much waste the public safety headquarters building is going to produce down Main Street for that pipe.
Very little.
Any other questions before we move on to the field side?
Just to finish the thought on that master plan, I think it's in that plan, Ken, but I think at some point, especially as we develop the future I-69 corridor, and hopefully that gets developed, I think there's been some informal conversations that if that were to ever take off, and the areas sort of, by the airport and those areas take off, that there'd probably be a need for a new main kind of going down almost along 69.
More than likely, or it's really just a lot of interconnect. That's the big issue, is there's a lot of gaps in that line, but yes, there would be some interconnect, and there may be a lift station necessary depending on where it is. That area is flat, and so anybody that develops, like Jose said, we may have to pump it into another basin that's got capacity, but nothing's impossible. I will say that. Nothing's impossible.
All right, thank you. All right, so, yeah, money makes things impossible sometimes. So just a quick overview on the SSES side that we discussed last time. So the I&I study that we did, completed last year, recommended that we're going to have a 3-year plan to tackle the SSES. And really, that's just to get it down, you know, as you can see here, 350 miles. The SSES plan got it down 2 to 3. I mean, this priority 1 focused in on 56 miles. So we have a large system here, and we need a good way to tackle it. And really, the best way to tackle is try to knock out the worst areas. And that's really what the focus of the SSES is. 1, where were the worst areas, which is focusing on these 56 miles. Now I'm going to talk about those 56 miles. Where do we go into those 56 miles? We don't have money to tackle 56 miles, not even close. Nobody can. So this is the year 1 SSES that focused into this basins that you see on the map. As you can see, most of them kind of in the center of town, not much different than what Daniela mentioned on the capacity issues. But here's where you'll see what we're going to be looking for smoke is really all these type of different defects that can happen, whether simply on the private, I say simply, but probably the most common, people's cleanouts where they remove the top or they're mowed over. Those type of things, it seems like nothing, but when you add those up for a lot of homes, when it rains, it becomes huge. You don't see that on a normal day, but when it gets a rain event, it becomes really huge. Manholes also, old design standard for manholes was having pick holes, just so you can open them. That lets water in. All those manholes that are in the street that have pick holes get a lot of water into your system. Rehabbing, changing your standards on those. That's a big focus of what we're going to be looking to find. So jumped a little bit here, but in the smoke testing, these are the things that we want to be looking for. The defects on the main lines. You find some on the manholes too, because it's really what smoke testing does is pushes smoke into the main and see wherever it comes out. Everything in our world in general is the path of least resistance. And so if you can find a crack and a fissure to get out the ground, that means it's a pretty bad defect. And some, there could be light smoke, heavy smoke, but it can tell us where the issues are. Now on the clean out, it's very easy. You see the smoke coming out there. Now it's a little trickier when it comes out of the mains because it's seeping out through the ground. The smoke may go through like this on the cracks. It gives us an idea, but there is definitely something. This smoke does not just seep through the pipe. If there's not a crack in the piping, generally it's not gonna make it through. Very similar to manholes. Now again, clean outs and those type of things actually come out very easy. A big one, and we found several of these, is when we start seeing smoke come out of your storm drains. That's a big one because that is where your storm water goes. That means those pipes get full. It has a direct line to your sanitary sewer system. So this is what we want to see. We want to see it, don't want to see it, but these are, they can cost simple fixes, and this is how much they can repair, how much water goes into here. And what we try to do is give you an idea of how much flow could be going in. Now this is, these are estimates. We try to do our best to estimate, but this is telling us that we have 15 gallons per minute that could be going through here on a rain event that could be going through here. You fix that, it goes away. Now you seal that portion up. So these are the types of things that we want to find. And what you see on the right, I think we really did a good job on picking the worst areas because these are all the defects that we found in your areas. The blue being the light, the orange being medium, but the red being the heavy, where we saw heavy smoke, meaning there's more I&I coming in. And you can see how much we had in this area. So we can make a significant reduction once we take care of those items. Any questions on the smoke before I move on to the manholes? Okay. Manholes, so these are going to be more visual inspections. We actually go to each specific manhole, open them up, look inside of them. We have cameras, flashes to see whether there's cracks, corroded tops, broken lids in some cases, which, some of those we reported to the city to make sure that those are also public safety issues, that they get replaced as soon as possible. Because, obviously that is also something we have to think about. But there's many different ways that inflow or infiltration can get in. A manhole is just a vertical pipe, and it gets more exposure. So these are really where we see a lot more of the issues is the manholes, where I&I comes in. Like I said, the manhole tops is a big one. The sealing in between what you see here where they call pipe seals, these corrode over time. If these go away, water can just easily go through here. You never even notice it, but slowly over time, it's just water just accumulates and is happening all the time because it could be just groundwater. You don't need a rain event to cause those. So again, we're trying to tighten up the system as best as possible. So a lot of data here of where everything is as far as what we found, different categories. Like I mentioned, big portion of it is here. We was talking about the private side, the laterals and the cleanouts. It's a large number that you see here. You'll see that the main lines is going to be the smallest, and majority of these are related to the manholes. What we estimate here as far as possible I&I that could be identified is about 3.7 million gallons. Again, that is more when we're looking at the extreme events, when you're having a 20 or 22 million gallon total flow for the system. You could be looking at a number like this. If you address everything, you may be able to reduce that number. Again, just want to emphasize, just because that's what's there, when we do a repair, we may not get it to 100%, but if you can reduce 80 to 90% of that number, it makes a huge significance to your system. And like I'll talk in a bit, this does include priority. We handle this slightly different than capacity. Capacity, these are all the projects that need to be done at a certain level. We had priority 1 and priority 2. I'll just explain that real quickly. When I say priority 1, these are the defects that can be repaired with less money to make a big effect. So our low-hanging fruit, which are the simpler ones that we can take care of and not spend a lot of money and get a big result. So this includes both priority 1 and priority 2. So you'll make more sense in a second. One last thing I wanted to discuss before we go into the recommendations is one of the items that we kind of tackled on the side beside the SSES is really trying to understand Bottom Street. Public Works and Engineering understand what this means. Bottom Street is a very complicated area, just the way things flow, things are recirculated, and this has just happened over decades of different designs happening, and instead of replacing an old main, like for example, now there's a 54 that's here. Originally it wasn't, it was a 36, and then they put another 36 next to it. There's two 36s here, two 36s here. It does some circles. I know it sounds confusing because it is, and what we try to do here, and this is where the model, together with our field side, helped us come up with a game plan on how do we better fix it to not have unnecessary pipes, like Daniela mentioned, that are in bad shape, that we don't want to spend money on fixing because they're not needed. They're just redundant and they're not providing any service. And every single pipe will corrode over time on wastewater. I want to provide you a few examples. So we don't have all the money in the world to do this study, so we try to pick some specific areas to give an idea of what the system looks like. So this is, again, the plant is over here. This is hand road. This pipe is concrete coated. It's a concrete pipe that has a coating. This is more of a paint coating when it was installed because concrete with sewer gases does corrode. So they usually painted them to provide some kind of protection. You can see that protection is gone. It's peeling off, and this happens over time. So now this pipe is already being exposed to the gases and is starting to corrode. You won't see this as one of the projects because this is one, when I see this, it's not within 5 years you're gonna have issues, but within over 5 to 10 years, you really need to start thinking about this pipe. And this gives you an idea of something to start thinking for the future. And this pipe is the same all the way up here, all the way to Southwest Bend, Jordan. So it gives you an idea. Again, not in the CIP right now, but it's something to think about for the future. Similar thing was seen here on Willow Street. You can start already seeing the bare concrete, and that's on this side. This is another project that me and Ken, we've been discussing. one of those redundant pipes. It's a 36-inch that picks up, that gets being recirculated. That's one where maybe we can put in some smaller pipes, less to install, tighter PVC pipes to drain, pick up the flows. Ooh, gave up on me. Pick up the flow from this area. So different ideas we can have, and then I'll give you some good news here. Then this pipe that was installed back in the 90s. It was fiberglass pipe that was installed. Looks great. Hard to tell from here. Sorry, it's a little grainy, but the pipe it's in great condition. So some of the newer pipes are in good shape in what was done, but concrete, even your clay is one that I would say is, on large diameter mains, clay actually can be a fairly decent product if it's installed right. But so what we saw here is not a huge concern. Now, over 10 years, should you look at this? Probably, just to see what condition. Would I see any rehab needed here? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not, but it needs to be evaluated. So again, just want to paint a picture of, right now, we're focusing on the worst things that are out there. There's still other concrete small diameter pipes, other clay pipes that are not being addressed in this project, because then that funneling, and where I said 56 miles, and you see the mains that I'm gonna tackle here is closer to 3 to 4 miles. Once you start tackling, oh, should I do the next one and the next one because it's the same material? Yes, you should, because these pipes have outlived their life. They're on borrowed time already, but you need to focus in on what will give you the best result as far as reducing the I&I. But structurally, those could be other concerns for the future. So, any questions? I know I kind of talked about a lot here, but yes.
Make sure, I know you're going to talk about it soon, but you're saying those projects are not within your window to talk about.
They're not in my 5-year CIP, correct?
One thing I want to bring up, this area was it's been a concern of engineering's and for years. Part of the reason is if you'll remember back in the day, there was an old wastewater trickling filter plant on Willow Street that we abandoned when we built Odom. The sewer is going all crazy in this area. It went to the plant, then we took it away from the plant, then we had it, and that's why we wanted to study this area, because we felt like there's 18-inch lines that we can abandon that when it rains, we're getting 18 inches of stormwater into our system. And that was a big area. We needed to know where it went. And they did a really good job finding out directions and flows, and oh, this one went around this way. So that was a special one for the city, I think, to really find out. And then over time, 10 years, let's get those fixed up, corrected. Now go.
Thank you, Ken. So these are our recommendations. I can't go through what was your number of projects? I believe it was 12 projects that she had in capacity, because it's all over the place, as you can see. Now, main lines, we're talking about 42, 43 pipes that would be looking to do repairs. When we're talking manholes, we're talking hundreds. So I can't go through each one of them, but what you can see here is this is priority 1, priority 2 that I mentioned. The red being the priority 1 and the blue being priority 2. They're mixed in there. I think our approach here is really to just go tackle those that are the priority ones that can give you the best results. But you may have a manhole a block away that we're not going to do anything on, well, maybe because that manhole's not as bad. So again, this is based on the data that we have and want to use that so we don't waste money. But it is going to spread the work all over the place when it comes to the SSES rehab. And here you'll see the totals. What you'll see in the next slide is really just focusing on the priority 1. This priority 2 is not there. The biggest number that you do see, though, I would say on the sewer lines, you don't get your best return on investment, mainly because you're digging up. It's a long distance. It's costly to repair sewer mains. At the same time, if these sewer mains are bad, the reason that we bumped them to priority 1 is some of these are structural concerns. So possibility of collapses, those become real safety issues. On manholes, there's less of a concern on those. It's more isolated. And also on service laterals, also, you can look at those on a case by case, but sewer mains, we typically bump those to priority one just because of the safety concerns that could be involved. But on those, we typically televise those lines, see how those lines look, and we confirm they're in bad shape. All right, maybe 80% of it is bad shape, well, 80%, you can't replace 80% of the pipe, you're gonna do all of it. In some cases, if it was just a PVC pipe that had a break somewhere, we're just doing a point repair and fixing it. But some of these are the full length of the pipe. So that's when you see that the number is quite a bit for the number of, the amount of I&I reduction that you're having is it's not quite the same as the other ones. So any questions before I jump into the list of projects? Okay, so we took all the projects that we discussed, the ones from the capacity port side on the modeling and the SSES, and also some of the remaining study that needs to be done, like I have the year 2 study and the year 3 study, because we still have other areas that need to be evaluated, so we still have those left in there. The top 3 that we list here is really hitting the I&I reduction projects, which are the SSES, the manholes, the sewer mains, and the main lines. I'll throw in there that the mainline repair, in some cases, those are items that don't all have to go to contract. These are repairs. If the city has availability, those are funds that could be handled. I'm not going to speak to Public Works and Engineering and how that is handled, but there's an opportunity. It could just be a broken cleanout cap, replacing it. Simple things that can be done, not a lot of excavation, those type of things that that number, again, this assumes the contractor is going to do it, so those numbers can go down. But then the other ones, as you can see, then we start listing down the other capacity projects, the abandonment towards the end. And the only reason we have the EQ basin here at the bottom is really because we need to study it. We can't say that 9.5 million needs to be budgeted at this time, because that is assuming that it's not in compliance, and we need to put a concrete liner, concrete cap on top of what's there. So it's about 48,000 square yards of concrete. It's a lot to get that done. So I'm listing that in there, but towards the bottom, but that is kind of the worst case scenario. It may just be a small study, and it says that we have some improvements to do, but somewhere along in that neighborhood. I hope you'll have questions on this one.
So I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
One of the things that's I think important on this one is the service line. I know we talked about that, but when you smoke test and they're talking service line, he's not talking just the part that's in the city's portion. A lot of them occur from backyards where the houses were built in the 40s and 50s, the backyard's a little lower, and their bathrooms in the back. Their sewer line goes out. They have a clean out in the backyard. It goes around, it goes out to the front. Well, what we've found, and a lot of cities have this, we're not the only ones, is what's the best way to drain that backyard? You pull that 4-inch clean out, and that's a whole lot of water. So we've got to get a public program, a public information program out there, get the public involved to get those clean out caps back on, get some of their service lines repaired. But that's a big one that all cities struggle with. So that's our next step once we get moving on this, is to get that public message out of, we're all in this together. Help us out, because that is something we've seen over the years, and I've seen it personally.
And to clarify, just want to make sure I understand this. So the year 2 study, the year 3 study, those are $1 million a piece. And the purpose of those is to study the work, the effectiveness of the work that preceded it?
No, it's to handle these 2 years. So the basins that we focused on were these here, what you see colored in the map. Like year 2 is this blue, which is what you see up there, and this darker purple is what year 3 is going to be. So when we did the I&I study and we presented, these are the leakiest areas by the worst being priority 1 and 2 being second worst and so on. So this is so we can evaluate the rest of the leaky areas that we have. For this project, we had a allotted budget, so that's why you see this one's a little bit smaller than some of the other ones, because it was fitting into our project budget to evaluate as much as we can. And in general, so you can see these are not in order as far as numericals, so these are 26 is worse than 18 and so on, and that's where they go down. So that's to continuing studying the other areas, doing more smoke testing and more manholes.
But that work's already been done on study year 1 in the red.
What was that?
That work's already been done for...
Correct, yes, for the...
For the basins that are in study year 1 in the red.
Yes, that pinkish color here, or salmon, I guess, that's been done. That's what year 1 was.
Okay, so the one we just did is focused strictly on those.
Correct.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you. I was confused on that.
We can't know what's going to come out, but ideally in 2 you'll have less of the dollar should be less, on 3 should be less, just because there should be less defects on those. So, I mean, don't hold me to that, but in general, that's what we're expecting for the future.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Up to your last page, you had a ranking.
Yes, sir.
Trying to understand the logic here. You have number 4, do another study. I assume that's what we're talking about. What I'm having a problem with, we need to spend money on more study, because I think we have some more priority other jobs or other projects we have to create. In other words, I had $1 million. Why would I spend on a study and not doing some improvements?
Well, the reason that we have the study higher than the capacity is really when we focus on why we got down to those capacity, it assumes that we're going to do rehab work in all of those areas. So we can't get to the rehab until we have the studies completed.
To make it more point, go back to the previous slides. First
Oh,
priority,
sorry.
second priority.
I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I'll get me back.
Thank you. All right. Once I start talking, it goes.
Not on purpose.
James over say, shut up, yo, I'm gonna get out of here, okay?
Okay, I can go to now. Where I had listed priority 1 and priority 2?
I'll keep going towards the
Yeah.
latter part, and the confusion, I'll show you where it's for me. Keep going. There's a priority 1, priority 2. Where's that?
Here we go.
Right there.
That's the one.
You list priority 1.
Yes.
Priority 2's name show up on here. I would
Correct.
assume that'd be the next in line you need to take care of if I have that money instead of the study. That's what I'm trying to get at.
That is, if you look at the amount of I&I that you are getting, I mean, I'm not,
No,
it
I'm
could
trying
be
to say-
spent different ways. The amount of I&I that you're looking is about 750,000 gallons. It could, this is one where I can't say if the only way to find out is if we do that study, if the priority 1 recommendations out of year 2 are less than this, then I would say, let's go do priority 2. But I don't know what that number is going to be. It's the only reason that I'm saying we need to go find out, because it's expected to be a leaky area. That number could be closer to 2 million gallons. I don't know.
With the SSES work, we also try to go for the low-hanging fruit. So, because that's usually the cheapest to fix. So we found it's a great find for us. It's exciting when we find like a direct stormwater connection, because we're like, oh, we found a big issue. Those are usually pretty cost-effective to fix, and they reduce a significant amount of I&I. So what we're trying to do when we separate it by priorities is go after the low-hanging fruit. Because once you get into priority 2 stuff, like fixing or rehabbing existing pipelines, that can get very, very costly, but you're not getting like the bang for your buck.
Yeah, and
So-
the only go ahead.
Well, along that line, when you talk about low-hanging fruit and bang for the buck, you have the sewer main rehab as ranked number 2 on your 5-year, and it's ahead of your service line rehab. but your service line rehab costs less and it also saves 1 million GDP versus 483 GDP.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I can easily say it could go the other way. The reason I have it more higher is because that is more one that needs to be contracted out and it takes more time to get done. The private service line could be a combination of public involvement. It could be some work with Public Works. It could be tackled many different ways. The main lines is more contractor work. So I agree. I mentioned before the return on investment on the lines is less, but there was also the public safety issue on that I don't know if it's going to collapse in a couple of years. Hopefully not, but there's always a possibility. On service lines, there isn't. It's just the amount of flow.
Sure.
And one thing we got to remember is all these projects, it's not one that, oh my gosh, we got to do them right now. And it's not like a street where you can't do just 2 lanes of the street. The manhole rehabilitation, you could break that up into phases. Each one of these projects, each one of those, you can break up into, some budget money 1 year. You could break it up into CIP 1 year. It's multiple. So that's the point I want to make is all of these projects can be broken down even more easily. Yeah, bite size.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
So for the additional studies, let me ask this, is there any reason, and I guess, and this may go to what Mr. Rainey was asking, I'm seeing $1 million for a study when we haven't completed the things we've already identified, and the study is to identify more items. And I guess in my simple brain, I'm thinking, well, why don't we take that $1 million, put it into the things we've already identified, and push back that year 2 study to year 3, and now that $1 million, we could address things we already know about. Now we're in year 3, we're looking at some additional items to then address.
yeah, no,
And I don't know if that's what Mr. Rainey was asking.
Well, and I think that's up to us, right?
right.
Yeah.
And one thing to kind of throw out also, when I mentioned that $1 million study, the one thing is that a lot of this can be adjusted. Just because I included these here, this was grouping that I had. If you want to phase these over 4 years, this number could be less under $1 million and so on. But those are decisions that we love to hear from.
Well, let me ask this, is there any reason that the year 2 study couldn't be bumped to a year 3 and that money then used for fixing some of the items that we've already identified in the initial study?
The answer is yes.
The short answer is yes.
And one thing I want to make a point.
And by the way, we're not trying to figure all that right now, right? So some of this back and forth might be feeding the confusion that some council members might be feeling right now, because our objective here isn't to try and figure out the specifics of, well, we're going to do it in year 2 or year 3 or year 4. The objective of today was to update you on the latest of where they are with the study, so that it can begin to provide some improved level of understanding, so that as we get into talking about the expanded CIP planning window, you kind of get a better sense of sort of what might be some of the needs that are coming that we might have to worry about plugging in, right?
Yeah.
So we're not trying to solve all this stuff right now, and so I don't think it's worthwhile sort of going back and forth and trying to figure out what year we're going to do this or year to do that. I think we've achieved the objective of today, which was conveying that the approach is clearly a parallel approach, right? Like what Daniela suggested, right? There's a data-driven, model approach to addressing some issues like the upgrades of the sizes of the pipes. And then there's the other approach that's based off of data, both from the smoke tests, from, cameras, from inspections, et cetera. And they have identified projects from both of those approaches that are low-hanging fruit, which are obviously the projects that we would prioritize. And then we can then worry about trying to figure out, how much more we want to add to our plate, with additional studies. But I think we've achieved the objective of today. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns stemming from the big objective of the presentation?
That was a different night. I'd like to ask another question, but
What's the comment? I can't hear you.
Mark says he'd love to ask another question, but He doesn't want to.
But the way you talk, I shouldn't ask the question, so I don't know if I should ask it. But I'm gonna ask it anyway because I don't pay any attention to you. Service lines.
Don't answer his question.
You were talking about, we need to get people to, what have other communities done to facilitate that in their communities to make it happen?
On the private property side?
Yes.
That's a great question. And so Mike and I were just messaging because when the city of San Antonio did this, typically there is overlap between your older parts of town that have the needs with your qualified census tracts. And so what some communities do is that they utilize CDBG dollars to develop grant programs to be able to help low, medium household income residents to make the improvements that they need to make in order to help address some of these issues.
And for the benefit of those that are actually still watching this and maybe aren't lost, the benefit to the community of us stopping some of this storm water from going into the sewer system is a cost savings of the amount of water that we're having to treat that technically we don't have to treat because it's storm water. Why would the community be interested in being engaged in this problem that we've identified?
Sure, that's a great question. I think the answer to that is twofold, right? I think one, there's just the community development aspect of it, right? Which obviously, we just shouldn't want to have broken pipes, right? There's a responsibility that we have, right, as the owner of this infrastructure to make sure that it's kept up with, right? So that's one aspect of it. On the same front, from community development standpoint, we want to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in order to accommodate infill, as an example, or growth, right? We heard through Julie's presentation that one of the priorities is develop strategies for infill development. Well, if some of these issues exist in the core part of the city where the infills would happen, right, there's a direct link and correlation there. But to your point, I think the most cost-saving answer to that is the fact that you're right. If we're able to reduce the I&I, it only prolongs the timeline of when you might need to make an expansion to your regional wastewater treatment plant, which, as we know, because we've gone through them, are extremely expensive infrastructure projects. And so it's literally more affordable to address your I&I issues than it is to try and have a conversation about expanding your wastewater treatment plant. And so there's a true dollar savings component to this in the long run by properly maintaining this infrastructure, as opposed to just not doing anything and then letting it break down and then having to build something later, which then has a direct link to things like rates, right? And so part of addressing these needs ensures that we're able to keep rates reasonable because we don't have to worry about a large capital project in a premature manner.
Thank you.
So I hope that helps.
It does, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any last closing thoughts, Ken?
I think we summed it up. I think this was a good program that we did, and it gets us in the right direction as far as reducing those inflows and hitting priorities. That's the key.
Well, Mr. Maldonado, Ms. Lopez, thank you for your work on this. We appreciate it. Thanks for the info.
Thank you all so much. Mayor, happy to entertain a quick break.
Why don't we take a quick 10-minute break before we move on to the next topic?
Awesome. Thank you.
Who are we missing? Nobody? All right. Okay, let's resume the meeting now. Mr. Garza,
All right.
back over to you for the next report.
All right, awesome. So now that we've established, an understanding of where our big picture priorities are, or will be through the action agenda conversation, and we've gotten a little bit of additional detail on one of the big items that we just have not been, that we didn't know much about, and the I&I. Now, of course, it leads to a question around, well, how are we going to incorporate all these different priorities, maybe even some of the I&I components, into our CIP? And so to provide us an update on our existing edition of the CIP, which, if you may recall, runs from fiscal year 24 through 26, as well as an initial conversation on what it might look like to add fiscal years 27 to 29, I'm going to ask our new, maybe not so new, city engineer David Shebelak to spearhead the conversation.
Good afternoon. Here to discuss some of the proposed changes to our 2024 CIP program, as well as going forward, as Jesus had indicated. This slide and the next slide are all of the projects that were previously approved to be included in the 2024 CIP plan. This next slide, with information provided by the Finance Department, summarizes the total dollar amount, which funds are paying for what programs are going to be applied to it. This is just for information purposes. This is no different than what you previously approved. Our first proposed change is on the Bon Air subdivision project. The utilities for phases 1 and 2 were originally slated for fiscal year 23. They didn't get started until fiscal year 24, so we moved those into 24. And as a result, the street improvements that are going to result from that as part of that project will be moved to phase 1 to fiscal year 25, with phase 2 of the streets to fiscal year 26. Proposed change number 2, the Lone Tree Acres Drainage Project and the Water SCADA project. Both of these were submitted as part of the city's MIT application, grant application that was submitted last November. And the information, some of my old contacts are telling me right now that there could be 15, 18 months before these things are initiated as far as a contract from the state, and they say get started on it. So we've got a while. They're going to be pushed back into 25. Change number.
And by the way, feel free to ask any questions that
Yes,
you might have on
please.
these as we go.
Especially if I'm going too fast, let me know, slow me down, whatever. Proposed changes number 3 and 4. This is the Wagner Way, Lingo Lane, and Magruder Drive area. Wagner Way was originally planned for 2023. It was not ready to be implemented that year. Final engineering wasn't completed, and there are right-of-way needs to be acquired. So initially that project was pushed back to this year, 2024. However, the right-of-way issues have not been resolved. The design has been completed on that section, but we're also going to include, even though they're 3 separate streets, they are one contiguous routing from Country Club to Main Street. The right-of-way the proposed schedule on this now will be that we will try and obtain the right-of-way for Wagner Way in fiscal year 25, perform the engineering design on Magruder and Lingo Lane also in fiscal year 25. That engineering design will identify any right-of-way needs we would need, and those would be acquired in 26, with construction to be phased. At this point in time, no schedules, just to be determined. We don't know. We anticipate it being phased. Do not know exactly how we would break it out. If it'd be 2 phases, 3 phases, we're still discussing that.
And I'll just briefly add, I mean, it goes without saying that, there's some complexities with getting this project to the finish line, and we want to avoid just, as David implied, it was supposed to be done last year, and so we moved it to 24, and so I get that what we're proposing might be a little bit too far out there than what maybe we all envisioned, but until we can resolve, some of the lingering issues, it just doesn't make sense for us to use up or reserve dollars for this project when there's just things left to be figured out. And so once we figure out, some of the right-of-way issues, get further along in the design, we can always revisit the timeline conversation if council prefers. Obviously, when we do that, we'd have to have a conversation about funding, but again, it's just difficult to feel confident in a timeline while there's still being some items, that are lingering. And so for the benefit of other projects that we feel we can get done in the short term, we felt it was appropriate to just push this thing out until we can get to a point where we're like, okay, now it's shovel ready, now it's just, let's figure it out. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
I've got I guess a comment.
Yes,
When we do a proposed change, obviously these were kind of thought forth and they were, there was already a dollar figure, I guess, associated with each of these prior.
yes, sir.
Yes.
Can we?
You mean the savings?
Yes.
Yes, but it's not that simple because you're also going to hear about some projects that came in over budget. And so part of today is trying to get you up to speed on, the projects that, will be moved and how some of those quote unquote savings might be able to be used for some projects that came in over budget. But we'll also need some conversation with you all on some other things that are contributing to the over budgeted items.
Sure.
And there is an updated slide similar to the one that was presented that shows the breakdown of the cost. So, the
Yeah,
total.
no, I know it was further ahead.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, as we were going through, I guess.
But you'll definitely get a sense of how much money we're pushing out here in the next slides.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Proposed change number 5, Pleasant Green Drive, Delmar Drive and Odom Street. Delmar and Odom were originally proposed to be part of the mill and overlay project for this year. But we discussed this in the December workshop about Pleasant Green, about the section between Juan Lynn and Port Lavaca Highway, and the condition it is due to traffic pattern changes due to work on Highway 59. We've got large trucks going down it. The road is just deteriorated beyond any type of repair. And at that time, council approved going for a reconstruction project on that segment. We had, as part of the original 2024, to do Pleasant Green from Lawrence to Callis Street. That was going to be a mill and overlay. Discussions indicated that it didn't make any sense to do this segment here, and then leave this one. So we decided we would add in the segment between Port Lavaca Highway and Callis Street as mill and overlay, have that all the way completed. And then in order to complete all the work on Pleasant Green, we would reclaim and seal from Lawrence Street to city limits. Then Callis Street will have new street surface from Juan Lynn to city limits when we do this.
He means Pleasant Green.
Did I say Callis Street?
Yeah.
Yes, I did, didn't I?
And I will say too that, this, I guess, southeastern part of the city core, there's a big chunk of it that's outside the city limits. And so, there's a big chunk of Bottom Street and a big chunk or a shorter chunk of Pleasant Green that is not under our purview or responsibility. And so, that's just something to be mindful of, because even after we do this fix, there might still be some people that come to us as the city to say, hey, why didn't you go all the way to Bottom Street? Or why did you leave that gap? And the reality is that, our jurisdictional line doesn't account for that entire area. So just something to be aware of.
Do we coordinate that with the county at all? Do we let them know that we're getting ready to do this?
I haven't.
I personally have talked to Commissioner Garcia
Okay.
about it to give him a courtesy heads up, just in case he hears from constituents about it. We've had some conversations around how can we help partner, collaborate, on infrastructure projects that might be hovering around city limit lines, right? Because we do have a handful of roads like that. Think of North Street on the north side, this particular road on the south side, right, where it's almost right at the city limit line, right, where it might make sense to coordinate. We probably historically haven't worked with the county much on projects like this. I mean, I can tell you that in Kingsville, we would partner with Claiborne County and we would split the cost of roads that, were right on the city limit line or things to that effect. And those types of things happen, in other places. There's just not a big precedent of collaboration like that between the city and the county here for road projects. But this might make, a good candidate for that if we wanted to pursue that, so that we can get done, the rest of it. But that's just, conversation that probably just has to be had more with Commissioner Garcia and others, about their funding availability for it, right?
Well, what year are we looking at for this?
This is gonna be done this year.
Oh, okay.
This Pleasant Green is this year. So right now we're talking about fiscal year '24.
Yeah, it might be a good candidate to try some discussion, but just might not work for this one.
Yeah, at least not right now, but that's not to say that we can't come back and do, a second phase of Pleasant Green that incorporates the county, right? Now, I will say that, because I want to be clear, that I'm not insinuating that we do what we did in Kingsville. I think this situation is completely different, because in this particular case, the city limit line is very clear on where it ends and where it begins. And so in this particular case, I think the level of potential collaboration is that maybe we, spearhead the CIP management aspect of it, right? So think of like the agreement that we had with UHV, right? Where they cut us the money, but we bid the project out. We're doing construction management oversight, et cetera. Something very similar can be done there because obviously the county doesn't have, that level of staff to be able to do that. So I'm not suggesting that we split the cost of Pleasant Green that's in the county.
Right.
Because I think that's their responsibility 100%. But we can probably help with, coordination, management, some of that stuff. I think when you start talking about areas like North Side Road, where that city limit line is in between a ditch and the road, but fixing the road might necessitate work to the ditch, that's where it probably then makes sense to collaborate financially because that city limit line is literally running, literally along, portion of the project site. So those are two completely different, scenarios, right? Sometimes city limit lines are in the middle of a road, right? So, I mean, it's just, those situations could be a little trickier, but anyway, didn't mean to get off on a tangent there, but,
I'll have a comment. The city is in the county, correct?
the last time I checked, yes, yes, 100%.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
And the county's in the city. Anyway,
Proposed change number 6 is on the public safety building. The budget was finalized and confirmed and awarded, I should say, in February of this year. The project exceeded the initial budget by $1 million. So $1 million in funds had to be found to pay for that. Through CO bond interest and ARPA funds, funding that $1 million. Proposed change number 7 in the residential street program for this year. We had initially proposed Avenue D to be reconstructed as part of the residential street project, but in one of our preliminary meetings with RJN, they had identified that there was going to be a sewer line on Avenue D that was going to need to be rehabbed or reconstructed. It did not make any sense to rebuild a street that within a year or two we would be tearing out to rebuild a sewer. So what our plan is right now is to try and redo that sewer in 2025 and do the street reconstruction then in 2026.
do the street reconstruction in 2026.
Yes.
And by the way, each time we reference shifting or moving out a street project, we're very mindful of our goal of trying to address 112 miles of streets by the end of fiscal year 26. So even though we're recommending pushing some of these projects out, we're pushing them, but to either 25 or 26. Because we want to stay true to, our commitment to achieving these projects within that planning window, meeting our goal, et cetera. But as you're learning, there's some really good reasons why some of these make sense to push out. So I just want to make that clear. We're not removing them. We're not eliminating them. We're simply rescheduling them in the existing planning window.
Proposed change number 8. This was primarily just a budgetary change. We still plan on doing the same work. Initially, it was proposed to improve the lines using this pipe bursting technology. But that sewer line runs along creek bank, services are in backyards. We've prepared an estimate to do the work utilizing the cured in place pipe, the CIPP liner, and that is actually less expensive than a pipe burst. There are other benefits to using that. It provides the same level as far as pipe integrity when it's done, but the service connections can be done internally with the CIPP. That keeps from having to put a mini excavator in somebody's backyard to dig it up to reconnect the sewer. There's just so many headaches trying to go through fences, dig up the services, redo the yard, put the fences back up. If we can minimize some of these excavations and intrusions into people's yards, we'd like to do that. Not to mention the fact that we can save $210,000, or that's the estimated savings. This is a recap of the various proposed changes, along with the budgetary modifications. That which is in red is budget obligations that are being removed. That which is in black are budget obligations that are included in this plan. Any questions? Well, okay, I didn't use your phraseology, but red's reduction in the budget number, black's an increase, okay. It's meant, just add, subtract, reduction, okay. Anyway.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This sewer thing in Emerald Hills, there's a problem with sewage in Country Club when it rains a lot. Will this help at all, or is it further down the road? And okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't understand your hand signals, Daryl. Further down the road, okay. Then
got it.
We do have, I think it's in 25 or 26, plans to rework some of the sanitary sewer in that Country Club subdivision. I know I've been looking at that. I just don't remember what year. So that would be down the road, as Daryl had indicated. Finally, what we're showing here is on the CIP program, we're looking to spend $89,300,000 this year. Previously, would have been had approved was $97 million, almost $600,000. We're not truly saving $8 million. Most of this, that $8 million that's here, was for grant funds that are obligated to the city, but we won't start those projects until at least 25, 26, depending on how quickly we can get an approval from the General Land Office. That is for the MIT grant. Questions? The bar chart here indicates the expenditures by type of project. Again, my thanks to the Finance Department for providing this. Other possible changes to the 2024 CIP. These haven't been included in the project cost because we're still evaluating what their effect will be on the 2024 CIP. At Tanglewood, Phase 1 paving and drainage improvements, College Park paving and drainage, Brattle Ridge subdivision reconstruction, Phases 2, 3, and 4, Vista del Sol subdivision reconstruction project, and Vine Street reconstruction project. Tanglewood Phase 1, streets and drainage. We had an initial budget of $5.25 million on this project. The consultant prepared an estimate for us, and his estimate was $8.9 million. There are various reasons for this 3.65 increase in estimated cost. One of the biggest reasons is there's just been an overall increase in construction cost. We're seeing this almost daily increase. Also, the scope of the design drainage was greater. The scope of the work was greater than what was initially conceptualized when the budget was prepared. Urban engineering is currently in their design has source for replacement of some of the storm sewer pipes. The initial budget did not have for any replacement of storm sewer pipes. It was primarily to do cleaning of the storm sewer lines. So at this point in time, we're going to be investigating, exploring the cost with Urban to what it would be to just replace inlets as needed, adjustment for grade purposes as we redo all the curb and gutter there, and also clean the storm sewer lines.
Part of what we want some direction on from council as we walk through some of these projects are on the topic of drainage. Because I think by now I'd like to think at least that we've done a good job of educating you, stakeholder staff, et cetera, on the realities of the cost of drainage and the fact that we do not have a stormwater utility to help fund drainage projects, right? You know, because think about how we do complete reconstruction projects when they entail pipes. You know, we don't use COs to replace pipes. We use revenue bonds from the utility fund to replace the pipes for water and sewer. In the absence of not having a funding source for drainage, we are forced to utilize COs for drainage, right? So for example, if we had a stormwater utility fund that had capacity to issue revenue bonds for drainage projects, we would take a project like this and split it up into 3 funding sources the way that we split right now for 2, right? And so part of what we want council to think about is, do we even want to spend CO dollars on drainage projects? Because obviously that's taking away from, you know, being able to do more streets potentially, right? That's one, just in theory, right? Now there's also the reality that's somewhat consistent with even the I&I study, which is geographically speaking, you know, the city, you know, everything flows, you know, southeast, right? And so if there are going to be major investments in drainage, right, as we heard in the I&I study, right, even though that's an I&I study, not drainage, but there's overlap there in that it's our older parts of town that are the issues, not our newer developments, right? And I get that Tanglewood isn't new, but it's not as old as the core of our city, right? So there could also be an argument made that if we are going to spend dollars on drainage projects, should we, instead of focusing on upgrading drainage in a neighborhood that in theory may not actually need it, instead focus on drainage on more projects like Lone Tree Acres, for example, that is a true need for drainage because literally the water backs up into people's driveways. I mean, it gets the streets become almost unpassable. I mean, it's a legit quality of life hindrance, right, that rain produces there. Now, if council decides and agrees with the logic that, hey, you know what, because we don't have a funding source for drainage, maybe it makes sense to not spend a bunch of money on drainage for projects like these, and B, if we are gonna spend money on drainage, maybe it makes sense to spend it elsewhere. Then that would reduce the cost overrun for this project. And that's one thing that we need you to think about, right? Because that would make a difference with this project and some others where the drainage expense is one of the big reasons why the cost is over budget.
So, I know that it's the infrastructure that's caused the roads to be in the condition that they're in, but is it the infrastructure of the water supply or is it the drainage infrastructure? Because if it's not the drainage infrastructure that's caused the failure, then I don't disagree with you, but if
Well, the failure is failing because the whole street's just old. And some of the, obviously, I guess I don't get your question, because your question almost implies that the water and the sewer pipes contribute to the road failure.
And I just realized that maybe it's not, maybe it's just that we need to fix the infrastructure before it becomes a problem. The reason that we're doing the infrastructure before we're doing the streets has always been because of fixing the streets, but I was thinking that there had been some failures that had caused the streets to fail, so
Let me ask a question in a similar vein. If we don't fix the drainage, will it lessen the life of the street?
No,
In this instance, no.
no.
Ken and I have had multiple discussions about this. He's got more historical knowledge of this subdivision than I do, but he does not know of any flooding situations that have occurred in this subdivision. And with that, if that is the case, and I believe him, I don't see any reason to spend any money to upgrade the storm sewer here. You've got in this, where is it? There it is. This section here drains out Ashwood right into the detention pond on Lone Tree Creek. So that water just gets in the storm sewer, boom, it's gone. It's already to the outfall. That's always a major issue, is that if the water can't get to the outfall, then it stays in the storm sewer, hence then it can't get out, it builds up in the streets.
All right, think of Ben Wilson, right?
Yes.
Where it backs up because how its path to the outfall is complicated, right? Versus in this instance, the outfall is like right there.
Well, let me ask another question. If the street lasts 30, 35 years, is the drainage going to have to be replaced before the street has to be replaced in 30 or 35 years?
Kind of some history. Tanglewood was built, and a lot of the other neighborhoods, we look at that updated, the storm drainage master plan upgrade, okay? What that plan did was do a rain-on grid. They took a storm and they dumped it over Victoria. And one of the things we look at is each neighborhood is, what color is it? Is there houses that flood? Because that truly is, now we got a drainage problem, but when we look at these in a lot of other neighborhoods, yes, the street may have some flooding tendencies, but that's during a 10-year storm or even an extreme, 5-year storm. When I mean extreme, I'm talking high intensity, short duration. And what we look at as far as, and personally, is do houses flood? And we don't have any records of that. And looking at that rain-on grid, it didn't show anything. Cleaning them out, that's a big plus, I think. We haven't cleaned storm sewer in a long time. But is your answer to your question directly? No. It's not going to affect the street life. It's still going to maintain, the drainage is still going to be as good or better because we're going to have inlets, new inlets.
My question was, would the drainage system last the length of a new
Yes.
street?
Yeah,
Yes.
nothing else is getting developed in this neighborhood
Okay,
to produce more water than what's already being produced.
okay.
Correct.
And Ken, from my understanding, the cleaning aspect of the pipes is something that probably has never happened in the neighborhood.
Never happened. We're doing it on a lot of these projects because We did it on Red River, and I'm gonna be real specific, in front of Woodlawn Bowling Alley. When we repaved Red River, that used to flood and it would hold water for days. We cleaned the storm sewer, that problem resolved itself, and we started thinking, man, this is what this town really needs. Coming in, doing a neighborhood, cleaning that storm sewer out, I think the citizens will see an immediate benefit right there.
So then before, just to be clear on this, I mean, is the consensus what I'm hearing that a project like this, that we could spend money improving the drainage, but it's not a necessity, versus a project where it is a necessity? We want to prioritize spending money on what is a necessity to keep houses from flooding, rather than what I'll call just an improvement that really isn't going to change a whole lot for this neighborhood. Does that make sense? Is that what I'm hearing?
In essence, that's certainly what our position is as staff, but
Yes.
we want to make sure council's comfortable with that.
I think that makes all the sense in the world to me.
I think I would expect that staff, when they look at this, don't look at just the neighborhood in a vacuum, but look at the surrounding areas and see whether
Yes.
anything in our neighborhood that we're looking at could do something to alleviate a different neighborhood. But I feel like staff is probably
Sure.
doing that.
And one of the things that we can do in preparation for the next time that we talk about the CIP is maybe even show you, some of these images that Ken is referring to kind of, show you the data that backs up, our sentiment that, there isn't a big, there's not a lot of holding of water that's taking place, in this neighborhood, so that we can provide you and the general public that might be tuning in, some more specific data to back up, our opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think our drainage improvement dollars need to be focused and prioritized to the parts of the city that we do have issues with houses potentially flooding.
Right.
That's,
Or where the streets just become, impassable and it becomes a public safety issue if you can't get, an ambulance through there or something to that effect.
right, yeah.
But I like to remind people that Victoria's very flat, and our streets are part of our drainage system. And as long as the water's not getting up into your house, we intend at times, in some of these bad storms, for the street to hold water until it can run off. We don't expect it to hold it for days, but, for people to panic if the street fills with water, that really is part of the plan.
Well, back to what Ken said about cleaning out the storm system, alleviated a problem in the bowling alley, or where the bowling alley is. Are there
the Red
other
River in
areas
front
of
of the bowling
town,
alley.
because we just did an INS study, are there other areas of town where we just need to clean out the storm sewers?
We're doing that.
Well,
right-
remember, the INI study is not storm sewer
Okay,
related.
but if you,
The INI is,
I understand.
okay, so it's different
But
pipes that we're talking
It
about.
is different pipes, but if the water's not backing up in my backyard, it's less likely to go down the wrong pipe. Okay, if it
Good
gets
point.
down out of the storm system and it gets where it's supposed to go, it's less likely to get in the
Sure.
wrong place. Just
Very
like-
good
Yeah,
point.
we're also not solving backyard flooding problems.
No, but I think,
But I want my question answered. Are there other places in town where we just need to clean out?
I think with 100%, we need more cleaning done.
And
And
that's
there's-
where that drainage fee comes in.
Right.
Okay.
For the ongoing maintenance of that. And some of you may recall, I think it was 3 fiscal years ago now, where in lieu of selling off, a used vacuum truck, when we purchased a new one, we kept the old one so that we can use and focus one vacuum truck on cleaning out storm sewer, so that it wasn't taken away from the need of sanitary sewer.
And we've already started that.
Right.
That is point taken.
And one other, and Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, I think Jan brought up at the last meeting or 2 meetings ago about how with the big heavy rains, we didn't see the flooding on Ben Wilson. Some of that, yes, is part of the fact that there was some additional capacity built into that improvement, but my understanding is that we also cleaned the storm sewer in that neighborhood that's right there.
We cleaned that and some of Ben Wilson, yes.
And so that was a combination of both the cleaning and the increased capacity that now there's no holding of water on that area.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, do you want to add something, Gilbert? If you do get the mic.
I just want to hit on Mark's comment. currently we're in the process of this drainage storm study. Part of that study is to develop a budgetary structure over the next 3 years, and a lot of it's going to do with a lot of maintenance, which y'all, ladies and gentlemen, talking about right now, which will be tied to the fee, which will be brought back to you another 8-9 months from now. Just FYI, it is needed, absolutely.
Yeah, related to the stormwater fee
Yeah.
that we're analyzing right now.
David, can you talk about more about the Tanglewood Street, how it is now versus how it's planned to be up in the future?
Oh, yes. As part of this reconstruction of the street, we're going to have a significant, I say significant, a bigger crown, a higher crown between the center of the street and the gutter flow line on either side. So you will have, even if there is some water backing up in the street during the heaviest of the deluge, the center of the road should be clear enough for at least one vehicle to pass or move over it and not be submerged in the curb line.
So I guess it's safe to say, basically, after all this conversation, at the end of the day, Tanglewood will have an improved street with a higher pitch and an improved drainage system, technically, than it had before. And you'll be able to spend your assets down on the lower stream than there and get more bang for the buck. That's the whole point.
One other aspect of the proposed improvements is going to be that the curb and gutter will have a greater slope than it does now. We're going to be able to address that by adjusting the storm sewer inlets elevations. That's why we would probably be looking at least replacing the storm sewers as part of this, just not the pipe. Storm sewer, replacing the inlets, to account for the change in the top of curb grades. By that happening, the water runs down the curb, gets in the inlet quicker. If you can get it in there and get it out, that's half the battle. So.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. We got to get to Allison.
College Park street drainage improvements. The street drainage project budget was $5.1 million. Engineering consultant on this project, Civil Corps, has provided us with cost estimates on 3 separate options regarding various options as far as the storm sewer improvements. The street section is going to be according to city standards. The flexibility is in what we decide to do regarding the storm sewer. Option 1 was with minimal drainage improvements to include replacing curb inlets and adding some junction boxes to the storm sewer to facilitate the cleaning that Ken was talking about. Option 2, at $7.15 million, that would be upsizing some of the 15-inch storm sewer. Where this typically occurs is running from the curb inlet to the main. Current city standards are 18-inch minimum. So we're looking to upgrade at least to that. Option 3, at $7.5 million, that would be to upgrade the overall storm drainage facilities within that subdivision to a 5-year storm, which is according to the drainage master plan. Well, number one, from a cost standpoint, that option 3 I would not recommend, but also all of this drainage, all of these storm sewer drains tie into the drainage on the Barrel Street. We can do spend a lot of money on the improvements and upgrades on the storm sewer pipe sizes and such, but then we're restricted when we get to Navarro Street by the drainage there. Until TxDOT goes and does major project, you're still gonna have would have the same issues. However, at this point, from my understanding, there's no no flooding issues in this subdivision either. No reported. Okay.
So similarly, right, trying to kind of get a feel for, okay, well, how much upgrade of drainage do we want to do in a neighborhood where it may not be needed, or it's restricted anyway because of a project that may or may not happen because it's completely outside of our control, which should be a TxDOT Navarro project?
I think a blanket answer is We don't want to spend money on drainage that's not needed.
Right.
I mean, drainage improvements that aren't
Yeah.
needed. I mean,
Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that then.
Yes.
And we'll move on.
because we have plenty of other needs.
Yeah.
on drainage.
Yeah, and we have to get to Allison.
Part of in the 2024 street reconstruction project, there were 2 streets and 2 different subdivisions were bid on this. Phases 3 and 4 in Bridle Ridge subdivision, where that bid came in at $3 million and change. And then Vista del Sol subdivision, that came in a little over $2.5 million. Overall, this only about $3,000 over what was budgeted for that. However, we're still holding off on making any type of recommendation of award coming to council with that until we get bids in. We have some bids coming in on another street project next week. We just received bids on the residential street project yesterday. We'd like to have all these numbers together to know what it is. Can we do all this work? Will we have to possibly postpone something?
Right.
You know,
And I think council's position on the drainage improvements will help us fine tune this next time we chat about it, which, by the way, we plan to be at one of our regular council meetings in April. Because, had council said, no, for sure, do the whole enchilada in Tanglewood, and in College Park, well, then all of a sudden we're $5-6 million short. And so then in that scenario, we probably for sure have to move one of these projects. But however, with your direction that you're okay with us not spending on drainage unless we absolutely have to, we can go back and kind of figure out if we still have to do this or not. So.
Vine Street reconstruction project. I reevaluated the estimated cost for this project based upon some current bid prices we've received. And what we were seeing was an increase in about $330,000 for this work. As is right now, that project is going to be pushed to fiscal year 2025. That'll be our recommendation. Let me put it that way, because it's not me to make that decision. That'll be you ultimately.
Was moving this project also dependent on the others?
That's the idea.
Well,
Okay. So potentially moving this project could also be reconsidered if we don't have to spend all the extra money that we would have spent had we actually done the whole enchilada of the drainage improvements. So more to come on this one next time we chat about it.
Good.
Excellent, because if we don't have to move it, I'd prefer not to.
Yeah.
You talking about the
I
Vine
guess,
Street?
All right,
Are you talking about the Vine Street project?
Next slide.
Yeah, I don't want to move it either.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a question? I can't hear.
No, just the comments were, if we don't have to move it,
we'd rather not.
we'd rather leave it in 24.
We don't want to move it.
If at all possible, we'd like to do that too, because if we move it back, it's possibly will be, not possibly, most likely will be more.
Right.
Yeah, okay, understood.
But I want to make sure it's clear, this is also, it's part of the whole mixture. How these other 2 come out, and if I can do it, I'll leave it at 24. If I can't, it has to move 25.
Or we gotta have conversations on other funding sources, budget amendments, all sorts of stuff.
Right.
2024 residential street program. We received bids on this past Wednesday. Avenue D, I talked to you earlier about moving that street back till we were able to do the sewer line work. We did, since we already had quantities, we included that just as an alternate bid item, so we'd know what that work would cost. It was $950,000, I believe. But anyway, not including that, the bid came in at $3,662,000. This did include the Pleasant Green section between Laurent and city limits. That was over $1 million more than what we had budgeted for this work, and Ken, Darrell, and myself drove some of these streets to look at them to see if there might be some other way to improve the streets that would not be quite as costly. And we determined that a couple of streets, instead of doing a complete reconstruction, we could go and just do a mill, what's called reclaim and seal coat. and then we top that with the Onyx. It's fairly significant, what?
What we did on Will Hurd Road.
Oh.
If you remember, we change ordered that and we got it in, knocked it out, same type process he's talking about, adding cement to the base.
We've actually had discussions with Clark Construction regarding what these changes would entail as far as the budget, and we determined that we could reduce the cost of that project by $1.1 million, bringing that within the current budget amount.
So will each of these be a reclaim then?
No, sir.
Just some of them? Okay.
It's a combination.
It's a combination. I'm trying to remember exactly which ones we changed, and yes.
We can provide more details on that the next time we chat.
Yes.
On which projects are getting what application.
Okay, that sounds good.
Now we'd like to talk about some of the projects we want to consider going forward into fiscal year 27 and 29. But actually, before I get into that, I intended to mention the fact that all these projects in 2024, the bid prices, we're going to examine how they affect us going forward in 25 and 26. I'm also planning on reevaluating some of the budgets, the cost for those projects proposed for 25 and 26, because we've been seeing significant cost increases. I'd like to see what that would do to us. And we'll have that information for you at a future council meeting. 27 through 29 CIP window. These are projects that we think we should be included in that window. At this time, we have not developed any type of budget on those yet. That will be done. It just wasn't prepared at this stage. At this point too, part of it is we want to get council's input on which projects that they might have priorities on, or if they just would rely upon our recommendation on that. Guide grant improvements. This is probably for sure going to be one of the projects. We've talked about this one before with council. You got the main segment of the road from Salem to Mockingbird, which would include water line replacement, rehabilitation of the existing sanitary sewer, sidewalks on the northeast side. And get into that. With that estimated cost was $8.5 million. Sidewalks are estimated to be $1.2 million of that. I know that we're looking to pursue a Safe Routes to School grant to help pay for some of the sidewalk work. Part of that Safe Routes to School would also go along the Shenandoah ditch here from Guide Grant, crossing Mockingbird, and eventually would end at the Lone Tree Walking Trail. That project was $6.15 million estimated. Yes, sir.
Regular guide grant and talk about the sidewalk. Now, the sidewalks is going to be on the other side. We got right away, but it's going to be ADA. It's going to have crossovers, all that stuff, right?
Yes,
I don't know how you explain that, but yes, it's like a whole.
Right now, I think the concept is 10-foot wide sidewalk on there. Any ADA wheelchair ramps as required. I believe there's going to be I think we're looking to put in a pedestrian hawk at which street was it? Castaway?
Yes, pedestrian hybrid beacon at Castle and going across at Castle Hills.
Also, another option that was presented to us by Urban was the potential for an extension of Guide Grant to Leary Lane, from Mockingbird to Leary Lane. That would involve right-of-way acquisition, extension of a water line connecting between Leary and Mockingbird, extension of some sanitary sewer from each side, sidewalk.
And that alone's about a $3 million addition. You may recall that at the last time we discussed this, we, I think, agreed that we would focus on the existing part of Guy Grant because it was just going to be too expensive to run it all the way to Ben Jordan. Obviously, it's still in our thoroughfare master plan, so it can still happen in the future. But for purposes of what we may try and squeeze into the new planning window, we wanted to focus on just the existing part. Mark suggested looking at possibly extending it to Leary Lane just to help with circulation. We thought that might be a worthwhile, exploration. But ultimately, it's going to boil down to how we split the expenses up, right? And so we're still working through, how we do that for this project. But this is how it's shaping out to be. All right, we have to move on.
North Street.
Go to. Let me handle the next few slides. So, go back. Go back. So you may recall when we presented North Street, we broke it up into 4 different phases. And council gave the direction to focus on phase 3 because that's the one that happens to be, in front of Patty Welder Middle School. Next slide, please. However, each of those slides is broken up. Each of those phases, some of them are broken up into A and B, with 3 being one of them. And so that's why up at the top, you'll notice phase 3A, phase 3B. Now this looks a little bit different from what you saw originally, because we ended up extending phase 3A to go match with the intersection with
Lone Tree turns
with
into
Lone
Avenue
Tree,
C.
because it just made sense to kind of have a natural, division at that intersection, because the original phase 3A didn't go all the way to that intersection. So that's impacting the cost a little bit there. But you'll notice that phase 3A alone, from Lorenz Street to Avenue C, is estimated to cost 6.8. And so it's an expense that we're going to have to split over 2 phases is in essence what we're getting to, right? So even though it's only phase 3, we're going to have to split phase 3 into 2 phases. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of a little bit of what we're looking at, which, as we implied and alluded to the last time, we can start doing some of the engineering work during our existing planning window, which we're proposing happen during fiscal year 26. And then we begin the phasing implementation of 3A, which is the part that's in front of the middle school, right? And then 3B, which would be the rest of it. And so we do think that this is feasible and doable to split it up this way, but it's just one of those things that we have to be realistic that this whole project is ultimately going to take a long time when we have to even look at splitting each phase into mini phases, right? And I want to be very, very specific in this next comment that we have very intentionally put both the water and sanitary sewer improvements and the paving, drainage, and sidewalk in the same fiscal year for that first phase, because our thought process is if we're going to disrupt what's going on in front of the middle school, you might as well knock it all out in one go.
Yep.
However, the second mini phase of phase 3 does get split over 2 years, because at that point, it's not as directly impacting what's going on with the school. Does that make sense?
It does. And based on what I'm seeing, Guy Grant and North Street, or at least North Street phase 3A and B, are going on at the same time. They're in that somewhat, there's some overlap.
There will be some overlap.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
100%.
On the timeframe window, right?
100%.
Because we talked about splitting those out just because of the costs involved, but I'm assuming that because we broke down North Street into phases, we can handle both over a period of a couple of years.
Right.
Fair assumption?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but there's also more things to get done other than just,
Sure, yeah.
North Street and Guy Grant, even in the lens of thoroughfare streets. We won't have time to go into it, so I'm actually going to stop this presentation at this point, so we can continue it at the next time we come before you. But I wanted to make sure that we at least got through Guy Grant and North Street, because I know that those two are big, critical priority projects for you, obviously identified in the action agenda items that, you'll be approving in March. But just know that the rest of the presentation, and please feel free to go through it at your leisure, is simply intended to provide you a list of other projects that are under consideration for inclusion in that new planning window, ranging from utility projects to parks projects to facility projects, et cetera. And we're happy to take a deeper dive, into those during our one-on-ones or even next time we talk about the CIP. But there's just a lot going on, and some priority decisions are going to have to be made. And so that's why we're going to have a conversation with you, through my one-on-ones, as a group in April, as a group again in May, because there's just a lot of decisions, to be made. But it might actually be better if you took the time to review the list of all those projects before we start asking you for priorities anyway. And so if there aren't any other questions or comments or concerns on what's been presented thus far on the CIP, we will get to Allison today.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
We've said this before.
Yeah. So, anything else on CIP? No? David, Gilbert, I'm sorry for cutting it off, but I think it's only fair for Allison since she's been cut out, I think like 3 or 4 times.
Right.
Feels like 3 or 4 times.
Feels like a lot, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well then, I'll turn it over to Allison to talk about eminent domain. And part of the reason why I also wanted to make sure we got through Guy Grant and North Street is because we recognize, and I hope you do as well, that in order to complete those projects, it's going to necessitate acquiring some right-of-way. Obviously that's the same for Wagner Way, right, and Texas Concrete, but it's also the same for some of these thoroughfares. And so we felt it was appropriate to tie into our presentations a overview of the eminent domain process, because it's just been a while since that's been discussed with council, and obviously Allison is the right person to go through that, and so I'll turn it over to her.
Third time is in fact a charm. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I will make this as brief as possible. A little history on the city and eminent domain. To my knowledge, and based on the research that I've done, the city has never actually enacted its right to pursue eminent domain. That being said, back in 1999, there was a council resolution that adopted a policy for the eminent domain process that kind of walked you through staff's responsibilities and so on and so forth. That's a document that you have in your manila folder in front of you. I've updated it just a little bit with some language that's been added, but by and large, this process is governed by statute, and so there's not a lot of wiggle room in how we proceed with this. Now, Councilman Lofgren asked if this was the same thing as was presented to y'all back in around 2018, 2019 as the right-of-way acquisition process. And I believe that was in relation to Placido Benavides. And yes, it is the same thing. That was just a different title that was used back then, but I believe that that was the same process. So we will get started, and this is just a high-level view of what that looks like. So what is eminent domain? It is the acquisition of private property for public purpose in exchange for adequate compensation. And we get the right to enact this process in both the Texas Constitution as well as the Texas Property Code, which is where all of the processes are spelled out for how we go through this. What is public purpose? It has been pretty well established that roads, highways, bridges, you can see the list here, power lines, schools, fire and police stations are widely considered the public purpose for the purposes of eminent domain, which ties into the CIP and all of the things that we were talking about previously. So why would we use eminent domain? And this is not an exclusive list of reasons, it's just a couple of common things that are out there. One would be there's a dispute about compensation when it comes to trying to purchase a piece of property. It's a way to clear title due to liens or multiple owners if necessary. And it is also a way to acquire property if the landowner won't sell, and you need it for, again, a public purpose such as a road or a bridge or something like that. So this is an overview of the entire process, and then after this, I'll kind of backtrack through each one of these a little bit. And again, this is straight from the property code. You make the initial contact with the landowner and provide the landowner's bill of rights. There has to be a bona fide offers, one initial and one final. Those are made separately. It can get to the point where you have a special commissioner's hearing if no final offer is accepted by the landowner. If there are objections to the special commissioner's award, then that petition goes on to a civil trial like any other civil trial. And I'll explain the difference as we go along. So the landowner's Bill of Rights is given, we must give a copy of that to the landowner before or at the same time that we first begin discussing eminent domain. And that landowner's Bill of Rights letter actually comes from the Texas Attorney General. So that is something that we pull directly from them and we provide it to the property owner. That's a big difference that has been added to the code since the original policy was adopted. That wasn't in statute back then in 1999. So what is a bona fide offer? The initial offer must be made in writing. Again, the offer of how much we're offering to purchase a piece of property for. You must have, once that is done, then you will have the property appraised. And that must also be, the appraisal must be provided to the landowner. A final offer must be made in writing no sooner than 30 days after the initial offer. This is considered the negotiation period. A copy of the proposed conveyance instrument, the deed, the easement, whatever it is that we're trying to do with it, must be provided to the landowner, and the landowner has at least 14 days to review the final offer. They can choose to accept it, or they can choose to reject the offer that we've made. The appraisal process is multi-stepped. First, the appraiser must appraise the value of the property as a whole. Then they must go in and appraise it, the part that is being condemned. They then appraise the value of the remaining property. And then they determine if there were any damages to the remaining property as a result of the piece that is being removed. And all of that information is put together to come up with what is a fair purchase price valuation of that property. Yes, so this just explains that the commandor, that would be us, or the city, must always pay for the part acquired, but may also need to pay for the quote-unquote damages to the remaining property. And that's the difference between the value of the remainder before and after the acquisition. Nope. So, jurisdiction for eminent domain exists in both district and county court at law. So should it get to the point where a petition is filed in a court, we get to choose which of those we prefer to file in. The petition, once it is filed, must describe all the things up here on the screen, which is basically just explaining the things that have already been done by the entity that is trying to acquire the property in your legal document. The special commissioners, and I think this is very interesting to me. So once your case is filed in either district or county court, the judge will choose 3 disinterested landowners in the county to be part of these special commissioners. Each party will be able to present testimony and evidence of the value. Now, the special commissioner's job is to determine what they believe the value of the property is only. This is, it's an administrative process, so there's less rules in terms of evidence and procedure and all that sort of stuff than there would be if it was a regularly filed case in district or county court. So they'll determine the value. They don't determine the legal issues of the case at all. So that's why it can be disinterested landowners and it doesn't have to be attorneys or judges. It's just people. There's no discovery or evidentiary rules, and whatever is awarded to the landowner must be filed and served on all the parties. This hearing occurs promptly, but no sooner than 20 days after the commissioners are appointed. So this whole process is actually pretty quick. If you look at the timelines on paper, it doesn't take long to get from the initial point to the end point once you've initiated it. If either party disagrees with the amount that's awarded by the special commissioners, they can file a written objection with the court. And once that is filed, the case converts to a regular civil proceeding. And then it proceeds as any other civil case would from there on out. And that is, I promised I would be fast. So that is the, yes, ma'am.
I was just going to ask, at what point in this process does the city, if we're the condemnor, become the property owner and be able to move forward? Do we have to wait till the very end? Or I believe the proceedings change so that we become the owner when the only argument becomes that of money? Am I?
I can barely hear you up here.
Yeah, the question is, at what point do we become the owner of the property? Because her understanding is that if the only remaining issue is dollar signs, we actually take ownership at that time or right before that time anyway.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
So we don't have to wait until the money?
Till the whole process is done? No, ma'am.
I think is it 2 weeks? I can't remember the number of weeks that we can take ownership.
Typically, my understanding, this is not legal advice, by the way, my understanding is that once it becomes a civil proceeding when someone objects, you actually get ownership through a writ that's issued by the court, and it's based upon you, the condemnor, filing a bond that's typically in excess of the amount of the award, plus a cost bond. And once those two bonds are filed, then the court is free to issue that writ. And typically, you're not seeking fee title, you're typically just seeking an easement. And so once you get that writ, you can actually move forward with the project and take possession of the property while the valuation civil trial is pending.
So the threat of, we're going to be in litigation for years is no longer a threat in the condemnation action.
Okay.
You'll be in litigation for years, perhaps, but it'll be over money, but in the meantime, your project can move forward.
So from the date of initial offer through the time periods that are involved before it becomes a civil trial, you can actually, a condemnor could theoretically have boots on the ground, so to speak, on that piece of property within like a 90-day, well, with about a 90-day period. Again, that's my understanding.
Yeah, mine too.
The mayor has a lot of experience with this.
Yeah.
At this level of experience.
Any other questions? Okay. See, I don't even think it's 4 o'clock yet.
So David can come back out.
Do we have anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, then we are adjourned.
Poor Dave.